a place that rejected absolutely everyone who got to it, but there were also those who were allowed to reach it. Only S-rank heroes managed to get there, to the Forbidden Dungeon. One of these people was a young man with dark hair and glasses. The young man, having got into such a dangerous place, did not seem to be scared at all, but, on the contrary, he wanted to be here. Many adventurers disappeared without a trace in this dungeon, and, apparently, the hero who fought the monsters this time will not be an exception, because the danger lurking for him and his team was great. A few days earlier, everything was fine. The man commanding the men ordered them to check everything carefully when moving things to another place. Everything happened on the basis of the S-rank group plan of the future. Later, the man noticed that one person was doing nothing. They explained to him that there were some problems with the girl, so she could not carry the load. However, the girl objected and replied that she could work and carry boxes. On the other side, there were two people who clearly had tension between them. The young man turned to the tall man and asked him what to do with him because he behaved completely wrong. Putting his hand on the armor of the interlocutor, the young man stopped the warrior so that he would not leave. The tall man, who had a sword on his back, clearly did not want to talk to the guy, but did not resist and stopped. The guy with dark hair looked into the eyes of the leader of the group, plan for the future, and again asked him a question about why he treated the girl so badly. The young man was a former swordsman, and his name was Jill. The man who was the leader of the group looked at the guy with irritation and was in no hurry to give him an answer because he did not want to discuss this issue at all. The tall man's name was Godak, and he clearly felt superior. The young man said that he was here to keep order, and he didn't care who violated it because he wasn't going to be silent. Gil advised Godak to think about his reputation as an adventurer. The man put his hand to his forehead and exhaled heavily. He did not understand why he had displeased the guy so much, and asked him why the young man did not like the methods that the leader of the Plan for the Future group applied to subordinates. The girl tried to stop the young man, because she did not want any conflict to happen because of her. However, the guy stopped her and asked her not to interrupt, because he was doing what he had to do. Gil looked at Godak again and added that he was unhappy with his activities. However, due to the fact that a contract was concluded between him and the guy, he did not want to violate it and sought to comply with its terms. Godak clarifyed actions, what the man would do if he left. Perhaps he would have told everyone that the young men were a burden. Godak clearly did not like what he heard, and the guy continued and said that the man needed to temper his ardor. Since the group was preparing to go to the most difficult dungeon, there should have been no room for discord in it. Godak listened to what Jill was telling him, but he couldn't admit that he was wrong about something because he didn't think so. Turning around, the man began to leave, but said that he would not advise Gil to stand out too much and command, because in the dungeon he would still have to follow the leader's commands, otherwise he would be killed for disobedience. The young man was satisfied with everything, and he did not bicker watching Godak go. The man, due to the fact that he could not do anything with the guy, decided to make a remark to his subordinates, who were dragging boxes of supplies. When Godak left, Gil heard that someone was trying to say something behind him, but did not dare to do it for a long time. Turning around, he saw the girl he stood up for. She looked confused and did not know how to behave. The girl, whose name was Claha, was an assistant who had only recently joined the future plan. She thanked the young man for his help. She was ashamed that she couldn't handle it on her own. Claha also apologized to the guy because he had to defend her in front of Godak. The young man replied that he was only doing what needed to be done, so he was not worth thanking. After all the preparations were completed, the supply carts and all the team members set off. Since the road to the dungeon was not close, the preparation took a long time. While the carriages were traveling, the girl decided to try to talk to the one who helped her, so she asked Jill if he really studied the art of the sword from a man who lived as a hermit. The guy began to laugh awkwardly and was surprised that Claha believed everything she heard, because they also said about him that he was the famous dragon slayer in the East. The girl also added that she learned everything from Godak because it was he who told her about Jill. The young man replied that he had not killed the dragon alone, but together with his master, however, he could cope alone. The young man did not have time to finish, as the carriage stopped abruptly. The guy fell down and said that he would never be able to get used to the fact that this happens. After making sure that the young man was okay, Claha continued the conversation. While holding things, the girl asked if Jill would like to sit down, to which he agreed. The guy also added that he generally did not like the fact that he had to wait so long to get to a very dangerous dungeon. After a short pause, Claha became a little sad, saying that she was just a new assistant in the group, planned for the future. Lowering her head, the girl asked if she could ask Gil a question that had arisen in her mind for a long time. Claha turned her head to look at the young man's reaction and asked him how she could become stronger. It seemed that, at first, Gil did not even understand what his interlocutor wanted to hear from him. Staring at Claha, Gil seemed horrified by what the girl wanted to hear from him. The assistant did not understand why her interlocutor had such a strange reaction to her question. The girl was confused. She began to justify herself, but the only question that arose from the young man was why she asked him, because the guy was not someone outstanding. Claha replied that she had loved exploits since childhood and wanted to travel someday, so she was packing and preparing for battles, and now she has already reached the age when she can become an adventurer. The girl also replied that she wants to master the sword, because survival skills are important for adventures, as well as strength that will help win battles with monsters. However, it was difficult for Claha to realize her dream, because no one wanted to teach her or become a mentor, as it could be burdensome. When the girl first joined the Plan of the Future, she was told that she would undergo special training to increase her rank in order to join the main staff. However, Claha remained an assistant because she was only told to watch and remember what others were doing. The young man realized that no one simply knew how to properly teach someone. The young man also noted that he was invited to the team on purpose because he was not part of the main squad, but could strengthen the team. Gil thought that teaching the girl would not be easy. The girl was embarrassed and added that she herself understood that agreeing to her request was burdensome. The guy decided to give an example and asked what Claha would do if a monster dog or some other monster appeared in front of her and attacked her. The girl was surprised by the change of subject. Claha assumed that she would need to aim, find a weak spot, and hit it. The young man did not agree with this option and said that it was worth doing something else. Gil continued and said that it would be better to calculate in advance where the monster would run from and set traps, because the best solution would be preliminary preparation for battle. The girl did not assume that the question could be answered in this way, to which the guy replied that the situation was really a trick. However, what the young man said is the best solution for Claha. Since there are no rules in battles, each person's methods can be very different from each other. Even the same person can use different approaches in different situations. However, the most important thing was to know how a person adapted to the situation and what they can do when they are in danger. Gil also added that the main thing was also that the whole outcome of the battle would depend on the right choice. Even if it seems that some method will never be used, then most likely one day it will still come in handy. The more options a person has, the higher his strength will become. If one tactic option is effective on its own, then regardless of the situation, it will be able to help at the most unexpected moment, when it would seem nothing will help anymore. The young man added that he was only trying to say that he needed to study more and gain experience and knowledge. You will also need to try not to get injured and lead a healthy lifestyle. Claha looked at the interlocutor and noted that he was a very serious person, to which the young man smiled and replied that he was just a realist. Averting his eyes, Gil noted that although he spoke confidently enough, he himself was sweet only with a sword and did not have many backup options. Otherwise, the young man was not good, so it could be said that he had only one strong point, but he understood this and tried not to envy those in whom it was different. Claha was surprised that the young man was so self-critical of himself. Later, he also added that he had very poor eyesight, which significantly reduced his superiority over others. The guy also reported that during the fight with the dragon, a curse was placed on his eyes, and of all the strengthening effects, only the increase in strength worked on him. Because of the curse, the young man could not always quickly find traps and other obstacles, but he had another drawback. When she heard about this, the girl was scared because she understood how difficult it was for Gil. It turned out that the guy was suffering from topographical disorientation. It seemed like it couldn't be worse than a curse. However, it was a really problematic point. The guy explained that before he got to the right place, he started his journey in a different direction from the right state. The girl, upon learning about this, admitted that this problem is more serious than the curse. The young man explained that if his glasses broke, then he would be finished, and also that if he ended up in the dungeon alone, then perhaps he would never be able to return back. The girl did not know what to say to the guy's revelation because she understood how hard it was for him. Later, Gil took out a package. It turned out that it was a case for glasses. Gil added that it would be very difficult for him if they disappeared, thereby explaining what responsibility his interlocutor would bear. But it was her duty as an assistant to the squad. Later, the couple was surprised that the carriages had stopped. Looking out, they realized that they had already reached the dungeon. In order not to detain anyone, the guy and the girl hurried outside. Taking everything she needed with her, Claha said goodbye to the guy because she had to go with other assistants. The young man waited for a while, but still decided to say something else. Gil said that if the girl wanted to have more skills for the future, then after this dungeon he would not mind starting to teach her. The girl at first thought she had misheard, but the guy repeated it. The young man did not mind teaching claw swordsmanship, although he did not consider himself too good to teach someone. Also, his technique was not unique because he studied in different masters. Holding out his hand to the interlocutor, the young man said that he agreed to her proposal, although he did not consider himself worthy of such an honor. Claha was very pleased. She bowed low, holding the hand outstretched to her with both hands. She thanked Gil for deciding to help her. The promise was made, but it was very unexpected and unusual. Claha was glad that she could finally become an adventurer and not just an assistant in the plan of the future. After shaking hands, the couple agreed to continue their conversation when they came out of the dungeon and became freer. However, none of them expected what would happen in such a dangerous place. 2 hours later, the young man, having broken his glasses into small pieces, was left completely alone in a dangerous dungeon. What happened was what he feared so much, telling his weaknesses to the girl. Gil was on his knees, a tear streaming from one eye. The guy was desperate because he knew that in such a situation it would be difficult for him to get out, as well as to survive in general. An incredible thing happened some time ago. In general, the capture of the maze was successful, but it was up to a certain time. Even S-rank adventurers haven't advanced beyond the 3rd yet. The support team laid out a safe route, along which the wave team successfully advanced. The main squad moved forward, defeating enemies on its way. The warriors cleared the way to descend to lower floors. Each level had a master, that is, a monster that received special magical power from the maze to protect it. Unlike the rest of the magical monsters, the owner did not wander through the maze. Instead, he was in the main hall, waiting for the adventurers. There are situations when it is possible to pass through the master's room and find a passage to the next level, but this cannot be done on the 3rd level. The team was noticeably wary, especially Godak. Gil, seeing the monster that needed to be fought, rushed at him first to distract him. However, then something happened that the young man could not have expected, because this had never happened to him before. According to the plan, the vanguard took the blow, according to the formation with the attackers in front. There were no complaints about this tactic, because it worked. Since Gil only wielded a sword, he wasn't surprised to be put on the front line. Also, he was not afraid of a sudden attack from afar. It was even easier for him because it was a good workout for the guy. However, he didn't feel like anyone was helping him at all. Before he could think about what was happening, the young man saw his friend standing behind him. Godak had a powerful sword, which was his calling card. The sword was called the Eraser, and the guy saw how the man filled his sweat with magical energy before the fight. It was justified, because the dungeon master was too strong a rival. Everyone understood what would happen if they missed a blow from the monster. It was wise to use the sword, so the young man signaled to the leader that he would buy time to attack. However, the unexpected happened. While the young man was still in the affected area, Godak decided to use a deadly attack, activating a magical release. Gil couldn't understand what was going on behind his back, because he was acting as the one who distracted the monster. Later, he realized that Man H had waited for the moment when the guy would leave the affected area. The young man began to shout at Godak to take his time and wait, but everything was in vain. The man, using his sword, activated the blow, after which a pitch-black flash flashed. The young man, looking back, realized that he would not have time to do anything to dodge. The monster's hand immediately appeared over Gil, deciding to get rid of him while Godak waited for the end of the fight. The monster hit the young man, slamming him into the floor. There was an explosion, as a result of which the irreparable happened. The shockwave affected not only the monster and the swordsman distracting the monster from the team, but also the space around, as well as the rest of the group. First, the ground disappeared from under Gil's feet, and then he felt himself in freefall. It seemed as if everything was not happening to him, or he was having some strange dream. Turning his head, the young man saw that the owner of the 3rd level of the maze was flying down next to him, as if in a friendly way. Gil decided that, even in such a situation, he would not forget that the monster was trying to kill him, so he was not going to just fall down, waiting for him and the monster to reach the ground. Summoning all his strength, the young man grabbed his sword and decided to fight desperately to destroy the creature next to him. After some time, the young man still found himself on the ground. He lost consciousness for a while, but when he came to, he realized that he had won and was lying on the carcass of his enemy. Pulling his sword out of the monster, the young man told himself that the owner of the third level of the dungeon was really strong. However, looking up, the guy thought about it. The height from which Gil had fallen was too high for him to have even a chance of getting back. The young man began to realize that he was stuck in a place like this, and all this was because of Godaki, who deliberately doomed the guy to death. The young man knew that he would never forget this. Gil couldn't understand why the team leader would do such a thing, because even though they had quarreled recently, it wasn't a reason to do such a thing. Because of the recent conversation, which was very unpleasant for the man, Godaka decided to get rid of the one who contradicted him. Raising his head, the young man shouted that when he returned, he would certainly kill his head, because he would not rest until the man repaid him for his act. However, the young man faced a big problem, because he did not know how he would be able to return back, because he was completely alone. Remembering the composition of his team, the guy wanted to believe that there were people in the squad who could help him. An image of the girl he was talking to when they got to this dangerous dungeon appeared in his head. The young man wanted to believe that besides Claha, there should have been other decent people who would not accept the injustice that Godak had committed. Since no one else appeared in the guy's head except Claha, he thought that if there were a lot of girls, they would certainly pull him out. All that was needed was to find a long rope that the girls would lower down. To begin to carry out his impossible plan, Gil began to shout loudly that he was downstairs and waiting for rescue. However, no one answered him, because the squad was no longer around. After carefully examining the ceiling, the young man noticed that something strange and creepy was happening upstairs, because it seemed like there were some strange creatures on it. Also, Gil didn't despair, because he was still wearing his glasses. Lifting the vision instrument up, the young man was glad that they were intact, because the glasses helped him to be relatively safe. However, later, the glasses in the frame cracked. The glasses were completely broken, which could only mean that the next time the guy would spend in the dungeon would be very difficult. Thus, the young man got into a terrible adventure in which he was in a vulnerable position. While the young man was getting used to the idea that he would have to stay in the dungeon much longer than he expected, everyone froze at the sight of the collapse. He was silent for a while, and Claha remembered how she had just recently talked and shook hands with the young man. The man said it was all an accident. The master of the third level was very dangerous, so the magic release was the only option in which they could win. The leader ordered to retreat, to which the girl asked why she was abandoning Gil. She didn't understand why it was necessary to use something like that until the guy had time to move away. Claha scolded the man, not even afraid to say that it was all done on purpose. The man was tired of the girl's words, so he came closer to her and grabbed her by the throat, pinning her against the wall. Clache began to breathe heavily. It seemed that she would soon suffocate, but Godak managed to let her go, after which the girl fell to the ground. The man replied that even if it was done on purpose, no one would dare to say anything to him because the young man was just a person to support. Claha did not give up. She understood that she was much weaker than the man, but threatened him that she would file a complaint with the guild against him. The girl screamed that the commander's actions would be regarded as attacks on a guild member, which would entail depriving him of his adventurer status. In addition, an attempt to escape from the scene is punishable by law. Claha also added that the witnesses would confirm everything, but Godak asked if she was sure that people would help her. The assistant did not understand what Godak meant, and then turned around and looked at everyone present. The leader of the plan of the future added that none of the team members would confirm the girl's words, to which she began to ask why the guys did this. All the team members looked very scared. It was clear that they were afraid of Godak. The man said that Claha only thought the guild disappeared because of his fault. Everyone who hears her story will think that these are just the inventions of a girl who can't do anything. Reminding Claha of her situation, the man turned around and ordered the team to leave the dungeon faster so as not to waste time. The assistant remained sitting in the same place and thinking that she could not help her friend in any way. Remembering how bravely he had fought, she blamed herself for her helplessness. She couldn't accept that she could at least try, for example, to reach out, but She was afraid and did nothing. After a while, another member of the squad came up to Claha and took her hand to help her stand up. He asked her to get up to leave as soon as possible. The man also added that if the girl was left alone in the maze, she would not be able to survive alone, so she should just obey and follow Godak's order. Claha looked at Holand in despair. The assistant asked why no one wanted to help someone who was unfairly sent to certain death, to which Holand replied that for all the members of the squad, Godaha is the only person they will listen to. There was only one S-rank squad in the country they lived in, so no one dared to contradict the one who commanded them. The girl could not believe that people would do such a thing, forgetting about their conscience. Holand added that this was normal because everyone was pursuing their own goals. For example, he needed to feed his family. Claha didn't want to hear it. The girl only thought that she simply could not leave everything as it was, even though she was alone. Seeing the look on the assistant's face, her friend said that she couldn't do anything. Claha understood this herself, but she just didn't want to admit it. The man said that it was pointless for her to go in search of Gil alone, so he advised the assistant that this happens not infrequently. Holand also added that adventurers often had something like this happen, so you shouldn't be so surprised. However, the girl was not going to put up with this. The man seemed to be trying to get rid of stress himself, so he took out a cigarette and started smoking. He reiterated that no one can say anything against Godaki. Claha clenched her fists and replied that she did not want such a fate for herself, because she did not become an adventurer to endure such situations. Holand patted the girl on the head, and she apologized to him for her emotionality. Holand also apologized to the girl for not taking her side, because he was in the squad only to earn money. Later, the squad returned to the base. Claha did not leave the guild. The girl did not want to return to the team, but she understood that if she left it, she would not be able to get into the maze of the highest complexity. Claha knew she didn't have the strength to resist. Time went on as usual. It had been 3 whole months since Gil disappeared into the dungeon. Claha did not give up. She trained to become stronger. The girl knew that one day the moment would come when she would re-enter that very dungeon and find a path that would lead her to the right level, where she would be able to find the one for whom she had tried so hard. Claha thought and hoped only that Jill was alive, because she would do everything to bring him to the surface, because he should not have disappeared into the maze. The girl ran every day to the dungeon so as not to lose motivation for improvement. One day, a carriage appeared near him. Claha thought that some nobleman had come to the labyrinth. However, later, the girl saw that people in armor appeared near the carriage, and she realized that the Order of Holy Knights was in front of her. Claha did not know what a military unit that was directly subordinate to the church was doing in such a place. They usually acted on the orders of the king, so the girl thought that something had happened. After a while, a lady passed by the girl, whom someone called. The Holy Virgin turned to the one who called her and asked not to do so anymore. The girl with long hair smiled and replied that she did not look like a saint at all, but her modesty only confirmed her nobility and modesty. After seeing the Holy Virgin, Claha was confused for a moment. She realized how influential she could be compared to her. The girl also began to remember Godaki's words that she was only an assistant who had nothing, that she could not do anything about the injustice she faced, that she could not help anyone who needed help. However, Claha remembered Gil's words that she could choose the strategy that would help her achieve the desired result. Because of the young man's words, she decided that she would not give up and do her best. The girl knew that she was not a full-fledged adventurer and that she could not do anything on her own. But Claha was sure that she would not forgive herself if she left everything as it was. Having decided on a bold step, the girl began to approach the knights and the Holy Virgin. Apologizing for the trouble, Claha thought about what she should say to get help and help save Gil. At the same time, creatures that looked like wolves began to approach the young man in the maze. They held the fish in their teeth, unwilling to share it. However, the young man was not afraid of his rivals. He began to bite into one of the creatures, showing that he would not retreat and give them prey. Jumping on one of the wolves, the young man forced him to surrender, and the other monsters who saw this began to run away so that the guy would not get to them. Pounding on his chest, Gil signaled victory in such a short battle. He behaved strangely because he had been alone for a long time and had not communicated with people. Calming down a bit, the young man began to giggle strangely and rub his forehead. He was glad that he was able to defeat the creatures who underestimated him so quickly. The young man looked at his defeated opponent and told him that he was no longer an ordinary person. He looked more like a gorilla from the human world, because his strength could only be compared with someone strong. After falling silent, the guy thought about the fact that 3 months had passed since he disappeared into the dungeon, which was quite a long time. After some time, the young man was already biting into a piece of meat that he managed to get, because it was not easy enough to find food in such conditions. The young man understood that he was already at the limit, because it was very difficult to survive alone for so long. The fish he took from the wolves was also bad, but there was no other food to get. Although the guy was holding up very well, but considering that he had nothing to survive, it was difficult for him. While Gil was eating fish, he found a crystal in it that could fetch a lot of money. Going to the board on which the guy drew Godak to show off in front of him, the young man showed him the crystal, but later threw it away, because it was useless in the dungeon. Continuing to eat fish, the young man realized that after some time he might lose his mind, because it was unbearable without communicating with people. Gil even thought that he was already dead, but quickly dismissed such thoughts because he could not despair. The guy believed that if he kept going forward, he would certainly reach the surface. Deciding to move on, Gil began to say goodbye to Kodaki's drawing, promising to meet him next time on the surface because he was sure that he would soon leave the maze. Leaving his temporary shelter, Gil resolutely walked forward, not knowing where his path would lead him, but it was better than just staying put. One day, a guy was reading some book in which people with topographical cretinism were divided into 2 types. The first was the stupid ones who did not doubt themselves and therefore got lost, but confidently went forward. The second type was insecure. They panicked because of the constant thoughts that they were lost. Even if they were on the right path, they started to get scared and eventually got the direction wrong. Gil considered himself to be the second type. Even during training with a mentor, the young man often confused the directions, which made the man laugh at how he joked about such situations. Although the guy considered himself to be the second type, he understood that if he panicked, he would wander even more, so the young man tried to convince himself that he would never get lost again. However, as soon as the young man set himself up in a positive way, his path began to descend, which allowed the guy to doubt his choice. It seemed strange to Gil that he always went up, but now the path began to descend. But the guy did not turn around and leave. The young man decided that he would always go forward, no matter what happened, but a trap appeared under the guy's feet from somewhere. No matter how much Gil convinced himself that he belonged to the second type of person with topographical cretinism, he still belonged to the first, because he did not think about where he was going and walked too confidently for someone who did not know the direction. Not noticing the button under his foot, the guy stepped on it, after which a wave appeared next to him, which was rapidly approaching. The water quickly washed the young man off his feet and began to carry him away in an unknown direction. Gil opened his mouth in surprise, but he couldn't do that. As soon as the wave calmed down, Gil was able to grab the edge of the surface and began to cough because he swallowed the liquid that washed him away. The young man was soaked all over and noted that the trap he fell into was very clever because it did not attract attention at all. Sensing someone's presence, the guy noticed that the trap was made in order to lure the victim to the right place and then attack. In order not to be in a defenseless position, the young man quickly grabbed his sword and put it forward to strike at the enemy. However, due to the fact that the guy did not have glasses, he did not immediately understand who was in front of him and noticed only when his eyes began to focus a little. A girl with long hair stood in front of the young man. She was holding her staff and did not look at all like she wanted to attack the guy. Gil was looking at the man who suddenly appeared in front of him, and later the girl turned to look at the one who appeared in front of her because of the waves. For a while, the young man could not believe that he was not hallucinating. Because of his poor eyesight, the guy could only see someone's silhouette, but he understood that in front of him was not a monster, but a man. The girl laughed a little and confirmed that she was human and was surprised, because she didn't look like anyone else. Gil couldn't believe he wasn't dreaming. Apologizing for his reaction, the guy replied that he had lost his glasses, so he could not see what was in front of him. Deciding to make sure, the girl showed 4 fingers and asked how many the guy had seen, to which he replied that there were 38 in his eyes. The girl realized that her interlocutor's eyesight was really very bad. The young man also could not understand why, after he fell into such a dangerous trap, a monster did not appear in front of him, but he met a man. However, right after the young man thought about it, a huge monster appeared next to the couple, looking like a giant crab. When the creature spoke, the young man exhaled with relief, because he was convinced that a monster always appeared after the trap. After sitting down a little, the girl decided to say again that she was a human being, because it seemed to her as if the guy could not believe her. Gil didn't understand why the girl was so calm, because there was a monster behind her that even he saw and heard. The young man began to draw his sword to ward off the monster's attack. The next moment, the young man shouted that he would use a hidden blade, most likely so that the girl would understand his intentions. A moment later, the young man delivered a fatal blow to the huge monster, splitting its body in half. Even though the guy couldn't see anything, he was fighting skillfully. Due to the fact that the floor was completely in the water, Jill slipped and fell, so the girl hurried to ask if he was all right. Although the girl was impressed by how the guy quickly dealt with the monster, she was more worried about how her new friend felt. Grabbing the girl by the hands, the guy began to rejoice that she was a real person. There were tears of happiness on the young man's face, because he hadn't talked to people for a long time, so he had such a vivid reaction. Touching the water with her palm, the girl realized that, most likely, it was her, but the young man did not understand anything. The girl explained that as soon as she touched the liquid, she thought that there was a magic circle in it. The guy did not know if this was true, because he was a simple swordsman. Looking up, the girl assumed that, most likely, it was the water that brought her here, as well as her new friend. The new cave the couple found themselves in was quite large and spacious, and was very high up to the ceiling. The young man asked why the girl was in the dungeon, to which she replied that she had come with the holy knights to clear the maze. Gil assumed that the girl was now in the same position as him. The guy also thought that she also fought with the master of the third level, and later her friend condemned her to death. However, the girl replied that it was not like that at all. The girl replied that she had only fallen into a trap that had moved her to a new place. She also added that she did not come alone and, unlike her, the Holy Knights did their job flawlessly. The armored men took the girl to the fourth level, which no one descended to, and later she stepped on some button, which activated the trap. The young man was surprised that the girl came accompanied by knights, and not adventurers. The interviewee hesitated a little whether to tell her the details and, after a little thought, continued. It turned out that the girl was a researcher. Gil asked if he and the knights wanted to explore the maze, to which she replied in the affirmative. 3 months ago, all the high churches began to repeat that they felt the sinister energy from this dungeon, but the girl herself did not feel anything like that. Gil, deciding not to delay, asked the interlocutor to help him clean himself, because he had not washed properly for a very long time, and the girl most likely possessed frequency magic, because she was from the church. The girl herself wanted to offer this to the young man, but did not dare, however. Since the guy asked for it, she added that he really stank terribly. The Holy Virgin replied that this was normal, because in a place like this, it was not surprising, so she hurried to fulfill Gil's request. The guy was thinking about how lucky he was to meet a girl, because in just a few days, he could already go crazy from isolation. Looking at his interlocutor, the guy thought only about how grateful he was to her for just appearing next to him. Thanking the girl, the young man began to circle around himself, rejoicing at how clean he was. After a while, the girl asked if some kind of curse was placed on the young man's eyes, which surprised the interlocutor, because he did not think that she would notice it so soon. The guy asked not to worry about it because he already guessed how to remove the curse. He also praised the girl's magic level, because she was able to feel his vulnerability to her. The girl also noted that the guy was very strong, since he was able to destroy such a large monster as a water crab with one blow. The young man replied that strength was the only thing he had. The Holy Virgin did not have time to say anything else as the monsters reappeared behind her. The girl froze in place and did not move. After a few seconds, she felt something rush past her at high speed, which she did not have time to see. The young man saved his new friend again by chopping the creatures in half. He did it so quickly that the girl didn't even have time to flinch. Gil suggested that the girl return to his base so that they could talk calmly, to which the interlocutor agreed, and the guy thanked her for her trust. The young man assured that he remembered the way to the base, so they would come soon, to which the girl replied that she couldn't wait to see the young man's hideout. However, the joy quickly subsided, because the couple did not get to the shelter for several minutes, but for 5 hours, so people were very tired. The girl said that her legs were very sore from walking. The young man apologized for this, but did not know what else to say in his defense. After sitting down near the shore, the couple was finally able to exhale, as they could now rest. Also, the girl finally decided to introduce herself. It turned out that the Holy Virgin's name was Lilia, and she was a member of the church. The girl knew that her name was too long, so she decided to offer several options. To make it easier for the guy, the girl said that he could call her Lily or Leah, and he could also call her Aunt Leah. After the young man also introduced himself, he wondered why the girl could be called Aunt. Pointing to herself, Leah said that she was already 20 years old and looked like an adult, but Gil replied that he still couldn't see her properly. The guy himself was 19. Remembering all the rules of communication with those who are older, as well as the vertical of power, layers of society, and so on, the guy asked if he needed to speak more respectfully, to which Leah replied that it was not necessary. Apologizing, the guy thought that he was acting strangely, but Lily replied that you could talk to her any way you wanted. Gil also decided to talk about what happened to him, but Leah interrupted him and replied that she was aware in general terms, since she had been told everything. Before entering the maze, a girl with blonde hair approached her and asked her to find Gil in the dungeon. The young man immediately realized that it was Claha. The young man was glad that someone remembered him, because it had been so many months since his disappearance that one would have thought that Jill had died. The young man was so glad that a tear flowed down his face, but the girl added that they hoped to find at least his corpse, which was clearly not worth saying. On the other hand, it was logical, because the young man could not get out or contact anyone in any way. No matter what, there was a man outside who was waiting for him. Looking at the guy, Leah asked how he got so deep, because he disappeared on the 3rd level. Since the couple was at least on the 4th level, it was strange that Jill went lower alone. The guy replied that he was initially thrown down, so he was not at the bottom of his own free will. This surprised Lily. Gil added that he did not understand Godaki's motives, but a member of his team hit him at the same time as the monster, which caused him to fall with him to another level. The guy was trying to climb up, going forward, but he didn't know if he was doing the right thing. Day after day, the young man continued on his way, as one day he fell into a trap that washed him away, and he met Leah. Seeing a human silhouette in front of him, the guy was so glad, because he was already on the verge of going crazy. The girl was surprised at how the guy compared himself to a gorilla during the story, but he explained that this was just a metaphor. Lily added that Gil's friend was just terrible, so when they got out, they would punish him, and now the young man should not worry, because Aunt Leah would accompany him. The young man said that 3 months had passed since his disappearance, so he hoped that soon he would be able to find a way out, while Leah offered to continue the way upstairs, as Jill had previously done. However, the guy reminded them that they would soon reach the master of the 4th level, with whom they would need to fight. Lily did not understand what the young man wanted to tell her. The monster was waiting for those who would get to it, but there were very few people like Gil and Leah. The young man said that they would not be able to defeat this monster because there were factors that would not allow them to do so. Some time ago, the young man was already finding his way to the next level, but a monster blocked his path. The guy was stuck for several days and could not figure out a way to go further because the monster was stronger than him. However, it was actually more correct to say that the beast was not stronger but harder than the previous one, which hindered Gil. The young man said that he could not hit his opponent because he simply did not see his weak points, and if he made a mistake, he would simply break the sword. The glasses would have made the situation easier, but the guy lost them a long time ago. However, Gil corrected himself and added that perhaps he was only justifying his weakness. If the young man had been a better swordsman, he would have cut through the monster, so he tried to train, stopping next to the water to recuperate. The girl was surprised that the guy was thinking about drinking water, and also realized how bad his eyesight was. Holding up a little liquid in her palm, which Gil called water, Lily asked if he was sure it was her. Looking at the liquid in the interlocutor's hand, the young man doubted his rightness, and Leah offered her new friend a stomach cleansing with magic. Suggesting that the guy go to the boss, the young man said that he had a sharp stomachache, and also added that he would not be able to fight until he became stronger. Lily replied that she would make it so that Jill could defeat the master of the level very easily, because she was very capable. Lily added that she would be able to make a real gorilla out of the young man, remembering his story with the help of amplification magic, but the guy replied that it would not help. Leah was surprised, but Jill continued and said that he was just holding back his strength, since the sword would not withstand his might, since it was cheap enough. The girl thought that the young man was just bragging in front of her, because he paid a lot of attention to his strength. The young man began to deny this, and added that it was not like that at all. The fact was that any sword would break if you used force thoughtlessly, so the main thing was to find a replacement, because when the young man's previous sword broke, he quickly bought the one he had now. It was also necessary to aim correctly in order to hit the right place, which was complicated by the lack of glasses. After the guy's words, the girl decided to ask him a question. Leah wondered how many times the young man would have to hit the monster to defeat it. After a short silence, Gil replied that only one blow would be enough for him. Looking at the interlocutor, the guy showed all his seriousness, because he was not joking, saying that if he hit with all his might, he would destroy the owner of the 4th level at once. Lily reacted quite calmly to such a statement, at first not even saying a word. Later, she said that the young man was very self-confident, to which the guy replied that he was only guided by his experience. However, he was still afraid that he might break his only sword. If a young man loses his weapon, he will not be able to continue clearing the dungeon. The girl understood everything. Touching the sword, Leah replied that she would give the guy a head start so that he could hit the monster not once, but twice. Using her magic, Lily cast a spell on the sword that made the weapon an immensely powerful, invulnerable magic sword. Handing the sword back to the young man, the guy saw that it began to glow, so the girl added that she had put holy magic on it. Gil was surprised, because Leah used words from the holy scriptures of the teachings of Sarate. Leah replied that she remembered them when she read the book in class. Although Gil's weapon could not be called a sacred sword, it was still strengthened. The young man thanked Leah and added that he was now in her debt, which made Lily smile. The girl wished the guy good luck in the battle, to which the young man replied that he would definitely win. It was about 10 minutes to the monster, however. Due to past experience, the girl knew that the path would take a little longer. 3 hours later, the couple got to the right place. The young man apologized again for taking them so long to get to a place he had already been to. After looking at the gate, Leah exhaled and asked if they could enter, to which Gil replied that he was ready for battle. Placing his palms against the gate, the young man pushed it open, after which the doors swung open, letting the couple inside. Passing through the gate, Leah and Jill seemed to be enveloped in sinister energy, but this was only the beginning. A huge monster appeared in front of the two people, which looked like an elk with an intimidating muzzle. However, no one was scared. The monster raised its voice and growled. The young man said that he would go on a frontal attack, even though it was dangerous. Despite the loss of his eyesight, the guy was not going to back down. Taking his sword out of its scabbard, the young man looked at the monster and shouted at him that he would destroy it. Leah, looking at the monster, assumed that in front of them was a nightmare from the Apocrypha, which she had read about. After a while, the creature began to do something with its horns. They gradually drew closer until they seemed to stick to each other. Pointing both horns, which formed a single one, the monster ran towards the young man, who also did not stay in place. Using his imperfect sword, the young man jumped up, rushing with all his might towards his enemy. In the next moment, the horns that were connected to strengthen the attack began to crack and fall apart. Gil actually managed to defeat the master of the 4th level with just one blow. Jumping away from the falling body of the defeated monster, the young man said that he still had a lot to learn. Looking back, the young man looked at the one he had previously been unable to defeat and seemed relieved. Exhaling, the guy heard clapping. The girl praised him, asking if everything was okay, and also saying that everything turned out more effectively than she expected. Gil replied that everything went well, but he was even surprised, because every time he used this technique before, his swords would not stand up. Remembering his past, the guy couldn't remember how many weapons he had changed. Leah only made sure that she was able to help. Looking at the girl, the young man thought that she was not so simple, because her magic was very strong, so she could not be an ordinary church servant. Leah was stronger than any priest, so he thought she was on the level of an archbishop or cardinal whom he had never seen. Recalling a recent conversation about age, the young man thought that the girl was much more than 20 years old, because she was too capable. Gil assumed that it might not be a girl in front of him, but a grandmother who was many years old, and her experience exceeded all guesses. Looking at his companion again, the young man tried to get rid of such thoughts, but realized that it could be true. After staying in the dungeon for 3 months, the guy realized that he could be mistaken in many things, which caused tears to appear on his face. Deciding that his emotions were getting the better of him again, Gil tried to calm down and realized that he'd only given free rein to stupid thoughts. Leah went up to the monster and asked the guy who he was. The young man replied that he could not see because his low eyesight did not allow him to do so. Remembering what the monster looked like, the girl tried to figure out which animal it looked most like. Thoughts overwhelmed Leah, which made her completely lose touch with reality, But after a while, she realized. Lily assumed that the monster could look like a horse, since it had 4 legs, but that was just a guess. It wasn't that simple, but Leah decided not to focus on it, and, brushing herself off, got up from the floor. After looking at the gate, which was now unguarded, the girl pointed to it and said that now they could pass. The young man was in no hurry and decided to tell Lily something important before they continued their journey. Gil looked at his companion and said that he did not know the terrain at all. The girl did not understand what the guy meant. The young man lowered his head and added that he was not sure that a passage to the next level would be waiting for them behind this door. Jill also said that if Leah suspects that they are going in the wrong direction, she should immediately say so. However, the girl interrupted the speech. Lily took the young man's promise and replied that everything would be fine because they could just decide together where they would go. Leah added that Jill can just rely on her aunt because she likes to explore the area. The young man clearly did not expect such a reaction. The girl continued and said that because she didn't leave the house often, she liked to study atlases to learn about new places. Leah was very lazy because she liked to stay at home and not go anywhere, but she also liked to read traveler's notes and various adventure guides. Pointing to herself, Leah added that she would be the captain on their journey, so the guy didn't have to worry about what would happen next. The young man was worried, but he decided to accept everything the way the girl told him, because it was easier that way. One day, Gil's mentor tricked him into a ship, which was eventually attacked by monsters that he had to fight, but even during the chaos, the guy knew how to find peace. Having chosen the direction of their movement, the couple decided that they were going in a certain direction, because their thoughts converged. Jill and Leah were somewhat similar because even in a critical situation they did not give up, but went forward, fully confident that they had chosen the right path. Their fighting power was doubled, and their morale also increased because they were together, thereby increasing their chances of success. Thus, the couple was able to descend to the 5th level of the dungeon in just a month. The path was not easy, but nothing could break the will of those who desperately wanted to live and get out. After a while, the couple moved through some kind of tunnel, the young man walking in front, dragging something behind him on which Lily was sitting. The structure helped the girl not to walk, but it was noticeable that the young man was not delighted with such a combination of circumstances. Looking up, the girl said that for some reason they still couldn't get to the surface, which was strange. Gil was breathing heavily, so Leah asked if it was hard for him to take her in the cart because they had been moving for so long. The guy replied that he was fine. It was fine. It was a good workout for him that he was pulling a cart with a man sitting in it. The girl turned around and looked at her interlocutor, asking him if she was heavy. Gil was silent, so Leah became a little angry. However, later, the young man replied that, in fact, for him, the cart was a bad workout, and he felt how weak he was getting by the second. The girl liked this answer, so she laughed and said that this was exactly what she wanted to hear. Leah decided to say that the maze was very deep because they must have been climbing up all this time. She also thought about the holy knights she had parted from. Lily wanted to apologize to the people in the armor because she disappeared so suddenly, so it seemed to her that they were angry with her. After a while, the young man couldn't stand it anymore. The young man stopped and said that he was thinking that a thought had long been in his head that they both had to admit. Leah didn't understand what the guy meant because he didn't say exactly what he thought. Gil caught his breath a little and, having gained strength, decided to speak out. Opening his eyes, the young man said that the girl herself should have already guessed that they were lost. Leah turned around and looked at her companion. Lily didn't seem to be worried about it at all, but Jill, on the contrary, was very worried. The guy continued and added that they had been walking for too long because he could not fall so deep down that he would not come to the surface in 4 months. Lily tried to calm Gil down, but he wouldn't listen to her. The guy was saying that they needed to admit that they were most likely going in the wrong direction all this time, so they couldn't get out. The girl looked at her interlocutor and closed her eyes, and later said that the guy himself did not understand what was happening. Leah added that those who are not well-versed in the terrain are divided into 2 types. The guy knew about it, but he didn't understand what Lily was driving at. The girl smiled, looking at the puzzled young man, and later raised her hand, pointing at the guy and decided to explain something to him. The first type of people are those who really go down the wrong path, but this was not about Gil, even though he did not believe in it. The girl continued and said that they always chose the road based only on intuition, but often the couple had the same opinions, and the young man added that this has always happened. Leah added that it cannot be that two people constantly choose the wrong path at once, because the probability that they both have topographical cretinism is too small. Gil was desperate, because it seemed to him that they were the ones who fell into this probability. Leah also began to talk about the second type who was not guided by the terrain. She reminded that these were those who were on the right path, but at the halfway point they began to doubt and turned in the wrong direction. The guy realized that he had just tried to do something similar, so the girl explained to him what he had begun to forget. Leah walked past Gil and said that this was what happened in any case. The main thing was to go to the end so that everything would work out. The young man doubted anyway, because it could be that when they reach the end, they will not find anything. Leah held out her hand to the guy to get up. Lily replied that in that case they would have no choice but to turn back and look for a new way out. The girl spoke so confidently that the guy could not doubt her words, so he smiled and calmed down. However, the couple's conversation was interrupted by a monster that appeared very suddenly. The girl was not afraid, she was only upset, because the monster broke her vehicle. The young man turned around and, with one blow, was able to destroy the huge monster again, which he cut in half. Jill, replaying the words of the interlocutor in his head, thought only that she was right and helped him not to go crazy in this situation. When the guy was quickly able to win another victory, which Leah did not doubt, she began to clap to praise the young man. In total, the pair had already passed 120 levels, so there was no point in turning back. Leah asked if Gil felt better, to which he replied in the affirmative. The young man bowed to Leah and said that he realized a lot thanks to her, because the girl, by virtue of her experience, knew what to do. Lily smiled and said that the young man should learn a lot from her while she was alive. At her words, Gil smiled and nodded. After a while, the couple moved through some kind of tunnel again, but later a fork appeared in front of her, which meant that they again had to make a decision which way to go. Pointing in the same direction, Jill and Lily agreed again and decided to go right. The thoughts of the guy and the girl coincided, which meant that they were indisputably correct. As soon as the couple simultaneously and unanimously chose the right path, the young man took up a new means of transportation and dragged along a girl who did not want to walk. The couple rushed forward, casting aside all doubts. Their chosen path led to the lower levels, into a dark abyss, which could only mean that their long adventure had just begun. After a while, Jill and Leah took a break to eat. The couple ate fish and drank the liquid which was cleaned. The meal did not last long, because the couple knew that they could not waste time, since they had been in the dungeon for a long time, looking for an opportunity to get out. Lily, eating fish, writhed with unpleasant sensations, saying that this food was so terrible that she could soon cry. The young man had long been used to such things, and was glad that he ate and drank. The guy also noted that he could get enough to be full of energy. Since Lilia appeared, the guy has clean water and impeccable hygiene. Although both failed to light a fire, the standard of living in such a plight has become a little better. After thanking each other for lunch, Lily asked Gil to hold out his hands to her, which the young man did without asking unnecessary questions. Using the power of water, the girl easily cleaned the guy's palms from dirt. Leah smiled and let go of the young man's hands. The young man thanked the girl for her care, to which she replied that it was not difficult for her to do this, but now she wanted to sleep. Gil said he was going to train, because he still had a lot to learn. The young man added that because of the owners of the levels, it was difficult to pass the floors, so he should have learned how to cope with them himself, without asking for help from the girl. Leah stared at the young man, and it was only after a few seconds that he realized that she thought she was bothering him. Lily began to doubt that she had helped the young man enough, and assumed that she had done something wrong. It seemed to her that she was only getting in the way of the guy, but he hastened to assure her that everything was not like that at all. The girl also recalled that she had specially learned spells that benefited many people. Holding in her palm the liquid that the guy had previously mistaken for water, she invited him to drink it without purifying it again. Gil tried to explain and said that he just didn't want to constantly use the help of others, because he needed to work harder on his own skills. The young man also added that all swordsmen who wanted to improve thought so, because with someone else's help it was impossible to become stronger. When Jill finished, Leah replied that she was just joking and understood all the guy's motives, so she didn't hold a grudge against him. The young man exhaled in relief, and the girl called him cute. The guy remembered his mentor, who, on the contrary, called him too cocky. Lily also reminded Jill to address her informally because she liked it that way more. The girl said that she liked to tease boys who were younger than her, but then calmed down and reminded her that she was going to sleep, so she wished the young man a good night. When Leah began to fall asleep, the young man left her at the shelter, and he went the other way to start his training. Walking along the road, Gil talked about how he had problems with Lilia because she constantly teased him, not taking him seriously. Having gone far enough away, the guy only thought that he had a lot of problems and thoughts about his new friend. However, the whole point was that the young man was aware that soon he would most likely fall in love with Lily, which made his face turn red. Due to the fact that she was around, the guy could not concentrate on training because he felt how he was developing sympathy for Leah. Remembering the words of his mentor, the guy remembered that the man told him to stay away from women. The mentor himself was divorced 5 times, so he judged by his bad experience. When the young man heard these words 5 years ago, he thought that the words of a man who had already been divorced 5 times could not be true. At the moment when Gil expressed his doubts, the mentor gave him the most difficult training because the boy had to listen to him. Remembering the man's words, the young man really began to avoid relationships with women. However, he knew that this would not last forever. Due to 3 months of loneliness in the maze of a dangerous dungeon and wandering in unbearably dirty conditions, the guy met a girl who practically shone in his eyes. Having lived with Leah alone for a whole month in a place like this, the young man did not understand himself. When he began to feel that he began to like her, he could not do anything about it. Because the young man had never felt anything like this, because the master had told him his opinion. After the man injured his back and could no longer be Gil's guardian, he told him to continue on his own. When the guy started walking alone, everyone perceived him as a disciple of his master. However, there was nothing good about it. When someone heard that Gil wanted to kill a dragon, everyone wanted to make sure that he was definitely capable of something like that. Because of this, the guy often fought duels, demonstrating his skills, thereby making friends who eventually left him anyway. Remembering his past, the young man realized that before he simply did not have a chance for a happy future, but he still did not give up. Leah always held Gil's hands when he finished eating, which made his heart start pounding fast in the guy's chest, because after that, Lily also smiled. To calm down, the young man began to meditate. Thanks to the barrier that the girl had placed, the dragons could not approach them, so this was a great opportunity to train freely. However, the young man could not let go of the thought that if he confessed his feelings to Lily in such an environment, it would look terrible. Imagining a similar situation, the guy realized that he literally would not have left the girl a choice and would have behaved like a villain, so he pushed such thoughts away. Gil thought that when they got out of the dungeon, he would be able to keep in touch with Leah, and after a year, he would try to confess to her. Plunging into meditation, the young man wanted to expand the inner power that filled every corner of his body, so that it filled but did not clog it, as if honing it sharply and sharply. However, the thought came to the guy's head again that the girl could be about 80 years old, because she was clearly over 20. The peak of the clergy's power was usually at a respectable age, so a girl could not be so skilled at 20. The guy also thought that he did not even see the contours of the girl's face, because he had poor eyesight. Leah also held Gil's hands only to clean them with a spell, so he couldn't interest her. The young man was so desperate that he even accepted that he would be rejected after hearing the confession, so a tear appeared on his face. However, suddenly, Lily appeared behind the guy, who came up to him, but he couldn't notice it because of his thoughts. Startled by the surprise, the guy screamed and later apologized for the noise. Leah also said that she woke up and thought that the guy might be cold. Coming closer to the young man, the girl directed magic in his direction, but she did not touch Jill, as she usually did. Smiling, Leah sat down next to him and began to activate a spell that helped a person not to freeze. When she finished, Lily said that this would be enough for 10 hours, so she advised the young man not to strain himself too much and go to bed as soon as possible. When the girl started to leave, Gil decided to ask why she didn't need to touch his hands this time to cast magic. The girl replied that she could use it even when it did not touch a person, because her skill allowed her to do so. After saying goodbye, Lily left, and the guy was very puzzled because he did not understand why the girl had touched him before if she did not need it. Remembering all the interactions with Leah, Gil did not understand what to think about the girl now because she acted strangely. Following Leah with his eyes, the young man clenched his fists because his body trembled, and questions began to arise in his head again. Thinking again about whether Lily was an old woman, the guy realized that each time it played less and less importance for him. Memories flooded the girl. She remembered the face of the one who helped her, but what happened to Gil later haunted her. She could not think that something like this would overtake the young man. She only saw the guy falling down, and she screamed because she could not help him at that moment. Remembering the voice of the young man who called her name, the girl abruptly opened her eyes and woke up in her bed. Realizing that she had had a dream about that fateful day again, the girl realized that she still blames herself for her helplessness, even though 4 months have passed. After the squad came out of the dungeon, Claha's life did not change in any way, and there was no news from the Holy Knight squad. Running past the houses, the girl remembered the guy, but it seemed to her that she was just dreaming, and nothing happened to the young man in that maze. It seemed to Claha that she was just having a long and terrible dream that only she remembered. Every day of the girl was similar to the previous one, and only nature reminded her that autumn was ending. As soon as Claha stopped to rest for a while, she heard someone calling her name, so she got up to look at the man. It turned out that Holand was standing not far from Claha, who waved to her in greeting. The girl asked why the man had come, to which he replied that he had gone out for a walk with the children. Because they asked their father to go with them, he went outside, but they missed each other a little. About halfway along the way, the children fell behind the man, so he decided to wait for them in one place. Holand put a pillow on the bench, sat down to rest, and the girl began to warm up her muscles. When she finished, Claha didn't look tired at all, as if it was a common thing for her, and the man was yawning because he hadn't had enough sleep. After praising the girl for her physical fitness, the man asked how she was doing, to which Claha replied that she usually ran for about an hour every day. The girl also added that she did 5 sets, 10 times, changing the distance without cutting corners. And every day she changed the program a little. For example, instead of strength exercises, she did endurance climbing a mountain. Holand smiled and said that the girl would certainly become a good adventurer. However, he was probably not the kind of person from whom it was nice to hear such a thing. Claha was a little confused and replied that this was not the case. The man also added that he did not need to overwork himself, but you can always go to the church to be cured, but you should not abuse it. As soon as Holand mentioned the priests, a cart passed by the people, which most likely belonged to the church. The man said that the followers of the church started their day early because they had to take care of ordinary people in the morning. Claha understood that. However, it seemed that Holand wanted to say something else, but paused for a moment, lighting a cigarette to collect his thoughts. Exhaling, the man said that everyone had found out that the followers of the church were interested in the dungeon in which Gil disappeared. Luxury carts were not often seen on the streets near the dungeons, but they began to be noticed about a month ago. Claha replied that when she saw the men in armor, they did not introduce themselves to her as church servants, so she thought they were just knights. The man noted that he had no idea that the church had such people. The holy knights didn't look like they were involved in risky business, so no one knew why they had come. Holand said he would hope that the affairs of the church would not affect ordinary people because they could be dangerous. As soon as Claha wanted to tell Holand about what she had done, she did not have time, as the man's children began to run up to them. The guy and the girl were very tired. They didn't have the strength, so they complained that their father was too fast. The man laughed kindly and began to cheer up his children because they still coped with the task. Addressing Claha, Holand said that lately he has not been able to get rid of the fear of everything bright and right. Stroking his daughter's head, the man added that he had a feeling for a long time that at some point everything in this world had lost all meaning. However, after his words, the man said that the girl should not take them seriously and wished that she would train harder because she would definitely succeed. Clasping her hands behind her back, Claha thanked Holand for his words and replied that she would certainly try. Sometime later, a cat came to the girl at night. Claha was surprised but opened the door to check on the guest. In front of her stood Arlene, the holy knight of the church. The girl apologized for the late visit and entered the house. The knight thanked Claha for her hospitality and for giving her tea. The blonde-haired girl sat down next to him. The girls were silent for a while, so there was silence at home. It seemed that the knight was gathering her thoughts to tell something. Claha remembered that she had already seen Arlene because she was next to Lilia and worried about her. However, she did not understand why she had come. The knight finally said that she would like to know information about what happened to the future plan in the dungeon 4 months ago. Arlene said that the group refused to go through a difficult maze, once in which no one could get out, but this was not true. Claha had heard about it, but she didn't want to believe it. The knight added that she also asked Godak for details of that day. However, the man did not tell anything and simply replied that his group would not go through the dungeon, so Arlene came to Claha. The knight wanted to find out why the leader of the S-rank group so easily refused to go through the dungeon at the first attempt. Also, the girl with dark hair added that Godak told her that nothing happened in the dungeon and no one died. Hearing this, Claha froze. The man also said that mistakes were made in the registration lists, so no one knew what happened to Gil because he was not listed in the group. Arlene added that she did not understand Godak's motives for refusing research. Claha realized that Godak had achieved his goal by getting rid of Gil, so he did not want to continue the research any further. It turned out that the man had a goal from the very beginning, to kill the young man, but the girl did not understand the main thing, why. Remembering Godak's expression, Claha was horrified at how treacherous he was. Noticing how the girl tensed, Arlene called out to her. Claha wondered if she should tell the truth, so she asked if Arlene herself had encountered anything strange in the dungeons. The knight replied that one of the 4 holy virgins, Lilia, had disappeared in the maze due to a displacement trap. Claha immediately remembered her, because she had talked to her before entering the dungeon. Arlene assumed that there was something wrong with the maze. In the dungeon, the Holy Virgin was searching for the origin of the Brotherhood, so the Holy Knights were extremely careful, but still no one could help Lilia when she disappeared. It was also strange that the trap was activated exactly when the Holy Virgin stepped on it. The trap was aimed at activating with a certain object, but Claha had not heard anything about it, because such complex mechanisms could not exist. It was hard to believe that the trap worked on specific people, but Arlene knew how it sounded. The knight replied that mistakes that could not be explained, could not be prevented. However, because of this, doubts arose that the maze was not easy. Arlene asked Claha again to tell her everything that seemed strange to her that day when she was in the dungeon. All the members of the group were silent, so only Claha could tell about what happened that day, because he also did not give her peace of mind. Arlene remembered the girl asking to save someone, or at least find a corpse, when she spoke to Lilia. The knight did not back down and insisted on finding out the truth, which is why Claha began to remember everything that happened. Looking at her companion, Claha seemed to gather her thoughts, because she understood that this was another chance to change everything. Some time later, the girl was having lunch at one of the establishments that were located near her house. That day, she met a man who seemed very handsome to her, but she did not know who it was. The young man had very beautiful dark hair and eyelashes, but it was not clear whether he was really a man or a woman. The man stood in front of the table where Claha was sitting, but at first he did not say anything, but later he raised his voice. The girl didn't know how to behave, but as soon as the guy asked her to sit next to her, she moved over and gave in. Apologizing for the inconvenience, the man began flipping through the menu while Claha silently ate her lunch, lost in conjecture. Looking at the stranger, Claha remembered Arlene, who came to her and noted that she was also very beautiful. After a while, the young man decided to turn to the girl next to whom he was sitting, distracting her from her thoughts. Moving even closer, the stranger began to wonder which dish was the most delicious in this place. Claha replied that for someone who was here for the first time, a hamburger steak would be suitable because it was a specialty. The young man asked what the girl would advise him if he had been to this institution not for the first time. Claha couldn't help but think that the person talking to her was very strange in his manner. The girl thought a little, but later replied that any meat dishes in this place tasted very good. Since the signature dish included 3 steaks and a lot of rice, it should have been enough for anyone to eat. However, after looking at the guy, Claha added that for someone who ate little, the dish would have seemed too big, but this did not confuse the stranger. After listening to the girl, the young man replied that he would really like to try the signature dish, so he called the waiter. The guy didn't wait for anyone to come up to him, so he just said that he would like 2 specialties for himself. The girl taking orders was shocked by what she heard, and for the owners of the establishment, this order was like a challenge. Since 1 serving was enough to feed even the hungriest person, the owners had no doubt that this order would be too large for the visitor. Quickly preparing 2 large portions, the man put all his efforts into confirming all the rumors about the signature dish. Claha tried to warn that if someone ordered dishes and then did not finish them, the owners were very angry, but she did not have time. 2 large portions of the signature dish were brought to the table where the couple was sitting. A bowl of rice seemed to be enough for a dozen workers. However, nothing bothered the young man. He smiled and was glad that everything was prepared for him so quickly. The owners were sure that one person would not be able to eat 2 large portions, and Claha, seeing their size, began to worry about the stranger. Without waiting for the young man to admit his mistake, the owners began to leave, but the guy raised his voice. He turned to Claha and told her not to worry about him, because he was not mistaken in his desire. Picking up the chopsticks, the young man smiled and prepared to eat everything in front of him. All the visitors of the institution watched this spectacle, because no one could have thought that such a slender young man would fit so much food. When he finished, the young man said that the signature dish was really delicious, and the owners of the establishment admitted they were wrong. After asking for another portion of noodles, the guy asked why the girl ate so little, to which she replied that she simply had no appetite. The young man got up, was about to leave, and told Claha that she did not look like a bad person. Such words surprised the girl. However, the stranger did not say anything more. He just smiled, looking at the blonde girl. Thanking Claha for advising him something delicious, the young man left the money and headed for the exit. As he left, the young man smiled again and added that he would do whatever was needed, sparing no effort. The guy holds the fingers of a smiling girl with his fingers, but something distracts him, and he looks back. They are in a cave and sitting on a large flat stone. A guy in a jacket, with long black hair and a smile, comes up to them. He looks at them and greets them. The girl says he's human, and the guy asks how he could be here. He must be lost too. The girl thinks he's a good person. The guy says this can't be happening. The person asks them not to worry. He smiles, holds his forehead with one hand, and directs the other towards them. He informs them that his name is Ununice. He is definitely not planning anything questionable. The guy and the girl are silent, watching him. After that, the guy reports that he is somehow suspicious, and the girl agrees. Ununice looks at them, dumbfounded. All 3 are sitting around the campfire. Ununice asks the main character if he broke his glasses and now does not see other people's faces. The guy gives him a positive answer, and Ununice says that then it's not surprising that he didn't recognize him. The bonfire continues to burn. The main character and the girl next to him are looking at the fire without looking away. They both repeat the word bonfire, and then the girl turns to Gil by name, who asks what she wants. The girl looks at Gil with a smile and informs him that a fire has finally appeared in their small shelter. The main character holds his nose and then says that this is a great happiness, after which he begins to laugh. Jill admits that he hasn't been so happy in a long time. The girl laughs and says that she is too, after which they both start laughing. Ununice looks at the cheerful guys with a smile, then stretches her hand towards them to show a stop gesture. He watches Jill and the girl go to bed. Ununice asks them to wait a little while for him to finish and then go to bed. The girl says that the fire will go out. Ununice says he can make them a new one at any time. Ununice stands up thoughtfully, holding her chin. He comes up with an idea, and he asks the guys what about it. The guys continue to look at him from a prone position. Ununice talks about Kurok from the group Plan of the Future and the captain of the 4th Squad of the Holy Knights of Arlene. Jill and the girl sat down. The girl asks Ununice how he knows the name of Atian. Ununice asks if they are interested in him. He puts his hand to his heart and talks about himself with a smile. His name is Ununice. He is the Archmage of the Stars. He is on his own. The guys look at the guy in surprise. Jill asks again about the Archmage, and the girl asks if he is famous, because he is the youngest Archmage in history. Ununice replies that everything is correct. The main character admits that he is slightly shocked. Ununice says that given that they are all about the same age, he thought they would know each other better. Ununice looks at the guy and says he's the great poison dragon slayer Jill. Then the guy looks at the girl and tells her that she is a saint who saves the island's Lily. Jill and Lily look at the guy in silence. After that, they look at each other, pointing at each other with their fingers. Jill asks about the saint, and Lilia about the great killer. Ununice continues to look at them, pointing with her fingers. After that, he continues to smile and looks at them questioningly. He asks them that they knew absolutely nothing about each other, despite having spent so much time together. He asks what they've been doing for so many days. Jill thinks about it, and then tells them that they were fishing. He also remembers how they drank delicious water and fought on their fingers. Eunice looked at Jill and Lily without smiling this time. Suddenly, he beamed and smiled again, saying that it sounded fun. The main character mentally calls him an oddball. Jill asks Eunice how he got here in the first place. Eunice says that everything was much easier for him than for them. Eunice remembers putting his hand on a drawn diagram. He tells me that he just used the magic circle, that he teleported St. Lily here from the 4th floor and then just followed the trail. Lilia is surprised by this. Eunice looks at the guys, pointing her hand at them, and says that he should be surprised, not them. They decided that simple survival was not enough for them, and even managed to descend to such a depth only together. Jill and Lily listen to him in silence. Eunice says it looks like all the rumors that their abilities are second to none were true. Lilia holds her head and laughs. The main character looks at the girl and then raises his head up, making only one letter, B. The girl looks at him questioningly. Jill screams and asks if the girl sees, says that he knew they were down. Lilia silently looks at the guy in disbelief. She tells the guy to think that he has earned a very valuable experience. Jill asks if she has decided to use it against him now. Lily looks at the guy in a stupor, unable to answer, and then she starts talking to him anyway. She tells him that he agreed with her in everything himself, so it's not just her fault. These words hurt the guy's heart. Lilia says that everyone should be responsible for their own actions. Words keep hurting the guy. The main character is already lying on the ground. Lily is silently looking at him. After that, the guy apologizes to her and says that she was right. Lilia says that's better. Lying on the ground, the main character thinks that the one who first went in the wrong direction was him. He remembers holding a round stone with an inscription with Lily. They are equally responsible for being here. But everything that happened before was completely his fault. He wonders what will happen if Lilia remembers about it. If she remembers this, then most likely the main character will have to crawl on his knees. Lilia is thinking about something. Lilia remembers everything and looks at Gil, telling him that he was the first to go in the wrong direction, but the guy interrupts her and shouts at Eunice, asking if he is here to save them. He says that, of course, but begins to object. Eunice says that he thought that they had stumbled upon the boss of a floor several levels above and simply could not get past him, as a result of which they simply found themselves at a disadvantage. He could not have imagined that he would find them so deep. He asks them not to talk about the fact that they wanted to clean up this dungeon alone, which Jill denies. Eunice smiles and admits that he is even embarrassed to admit that he was wrong. Jill is screaming again, denying something. Eunice looks at the main character in a stupor, who is lying on the ground, and confesses to him that they did not want to. Jill tearfully begins to tell something about the direction, after which Eunice asks him again. Jill says that in fact, they just have topographical cretinism. Lily is standing behind. Eunice looks at the guys in disbelief, arms outstretched. After that, he asks them what they are talking about. Jill, leaning her hands on the ground, says that all this time they were trying to get out, but instead they went deeper and deeper. He looks awkwardly to the side and asks if it's funny. He asks not to laugh, because, in fact, he wouldn't even want it. The girl starts laughing at the top of her voice, after which the guy says that it was not addressed to her. Eunice looks at the guys in silence, after which Jill addresses him by name. The main character apologizes and says that he thought it was an interesting coincidence. The guy says that it became clear to him that they both really have topographical cretinism. Jill says it is, but Eunice came down here himself. Eunice smiles and silently looks at the guy. The main character asks to stop because he has some kind of bad feeling. Eunice says that in any case it's completely unrelated, but he knows them both. He remembers the dragon and tells that the hero swordsman defeated a poisonous dragon that terrorized the countries of the East after he tried to poison an entire forest, and Lily, the saint who saved an entire island from flooding. Eunice recalls the huge waves of water and says that she erected a huge barrier to protect everyone from the raging storm. Lilia says that her master was with her then. Jill admits that he was helped by the inhabitants of the island. Eunice says that she really wants to know if they know anything about him. He keeps holding his finger pointing at them. Lilia thinks about it and says that he is somehow connected with the stars. The main character informs that Eunice is the youngest archmage in history. That's all he remembers. Lilia continues to think. She asks Eunice if he has created a new kind of magic or something like that. The guy says that's the right answer. He runs his finger through the air, after which a pattern appears. There are several special requirements for what can be considered a new kind of magic. Even if they don't know it, it will be enough to surprise them. Eunice is sitting on her lap. Arch-shaped patterns appear around it. He's thinking about how to explain it. The patterns form circles. If Ununice had been as humble as they were, he would have said that he was able to get this far only because of an early meeting with his teacher. He thinks they could tell him what the most important thing is, but they interrupt him. The main character shouts the guy's name. He looks at him in disbelief and asks if he can help them, because he doesn't quite understand what Ununice is talking about. Ununice says that in this case he will simplify everything. His magic draws its power from the stars. The main character expresses dissatisfaction. Ununice tells with a smile that they realize that he is one of the few who bears the proud title of Archmage. Even in a place like this, where starlight does not penetrate, he can still use his power to some extent. The main character silently looks at him and tries to understand what he is saying, while Ununice looks at him with a smile. He says he should at least use his power. Suddenly, Jill opens her mouth wide. Jill looks at the guy with angry eyes and asks him if he could get right to the point. The main character holds onto his heart and says that he feels like his heart is about to burst. Ununice asks if this is true. He stretches out his hand to the guy, saying that in this case he will be happy to help him. The guy gestures and says that in this place he has only 20% of his strength left. He is completely useless. The main character raises his head up, after which he falls to his knees and screams, asking what all this is for. Jill continues to hold her head with her mouth open. He is a swordsman with a distorted perception of space. Lily looks at him and thinks that he is a very moody young man. She is a saint, but she does not know how to navigate on the spot. Ununice is smiling and trying to figure out what went wrong. In this situation, he is a useless magician. A complete set of worthless people. If it were bingo, then everything would be fine, but it's not. So things are bad. The adventure continues. The footsteps on the water. Ununice asks the guys if they've been stuck on this floor for almost 3 weeks. Jill says they've already tried everything, but it doesn't work out. All 3 of them are walking forward. Waves are coming out on the water below them. The main character knocks on the wall with his knuckles. He looks at the guys and says that's the problem. Ununice looks slightly above the guy and is surprised by something. The guys see in front of them a huge stone slab in the wall, painted with patterns. Ununice wonders what a huge door it is. All 3 of them are looking at her. The main character says that even when he hit her with a sword, nothing changed. Ununice asks about it again. Lilia says it didn't work. The girl says that it is something like a magic circle carved on the surface of the door, but she can't see properly because she's completely black. Lilia continues to stare at the door. The girl asks Ununice if he could help her. The guy answers her with a smile that he will easily help her. Flashes of light appear around him, and the water beneath him begins to move. Behind the guy, some figures begin to appear right out of the water. The main character looks at it in surprise. The guy looks at these figures, which have already become several times taller than the people themselves. The main character asks him what it is. Ununice thinks about it. He says that this is just an ordinary spell. Water gets on the door. He tells us that he used water to fill the depressions on the surface of the water. He then transferred the resulting cast to the ground so that the shape remained unchanged, as if they had turned the page of a book. Lilia looks attentively at the water cast of the door print, which is sprawled on the ground. Ununice wonders what kind of magic circle it is. He thinks about it. Lily is standing behind. Suddenly, Ununice realizes something and opens her eyes. Jill looks at the guy in surprise. Ununice says he knew it. He asks the guys if they really don't understand the fact that they just happened to be here. The girl puts her hand on the circle. The girl denies it. Ununice looks at her and tells her that he doesn't think it's an accident. Lily carefully examines all the patterns of the circle. She says that, however, she could not have imagined that she would meet something like this here. The Apocryphal magic circle and the beast. Ununice says that, apparently, someone built this maze. Lilia and Jill are listening intently to him. It was built by someone connected to the fallen king. There are 2 books with painted covers. In the religion of Rosti, there are sacred writings that are remote from the canonical ones, called Apocrypha. In the dark, an eye appears from white lines. What is written in the Apocrypha does not have the purpose of entertaining the reader with some kind of fairy tale. White lines radiate further and further from the eye. The Apocrypha tells in detail the story of one of those who lived in the immemorial times of the fallen king, about a great disaster that wanted to destroy the whole world, and also about his battle with the apostle of God, Rusty. The girl directs the staff towards the white lines. Light emanates from it. Ununice snaps her finger and looks at Jill and Lily with a smile, inviting them to take stock. The guy points at them sitting in front of the magic circle, admitting to them that they both have a terrible sense of direction. The main character turns to him and says that the guy would not even try to escape from here alone. With a smile, Ununice asks the guys not to worry, because now he has become part of such a fun company. He tells them that for the last 4 months they have been wandering through the maze, moving completely in the wrong direction, or on the contrary, they went from here from the very beginning, during which time they also managed to defeat several floor bosses. Lilia says that everything has become clear to her. Jill looks at the guy. He has no idea what's going on here at all. Ununice reports that they are apocryphal beasts. Silhouettes are drawn on the circle, which are heading towards the person. These are the beasts that the fallen king used during the battle with Rusty. According to some theories, they were actually part of the fallen himself, but this can be omitted. Ununice stands in front of the door and reports that they say they were so strong that it took an entire army to defeat only one, because he could match the strength of an entire country. Jill listens to him. The main character asks the guy about the whole country and with a dissatisfied face says that it is quite possible. Lily is sitting in the back. She points her finger at Jill and asks him if he thought that was an exaggeration. The guy awkwardly replies that he is not saying that all this is a lie or something else. The girl pokes her finger into the guy's cheek. The girl remembers the beast that Gil defeated and says that the horse he cut was called Nightmare. Lilia asks the guy how he will react if he says that it was just a small animal. The guy is surprised. He is shocked that he was still a kid. The girl asks him if he understands now. The main character removes Lily's hand from himself and asks if these animals were here. Ununice listens to them. The guy says he thought they were destroyed by the apostle growing up a long time ago. Jill says that it turns out that there is some truth in any rumor, for example, that there are some animals left here, or that the fallen king created this maze. Ununice thinks this is pretty close to the truth. He looks at the drawings of the monster and tells the main character that at least some traces have been preserved here. Ununice examines the circle and says that the magic circle that is carved in the door was also mentioned in the Apocrypha. Lilia holds Jill's hands and looks at Ununice. She asks him if he knows that this is holy magic. She has seen it several times before. He replies that he thinks Rusty used the magic circle, which was recorded only in the original scripture and in 7 copies of the Apocrypha. He asks Lilia if she is not willing to be his apostle to grow up. The girl replies that she doesn't like it. Lilia looks up at the door and reports that, however, this magic circle is slightly different. This is not an ordinary protective spell at all. It just prevents outsiders from getting inside, and the spell also holds back what is on the other side of the gate. The main character moves his wand around and says that, in any case, if this is a spell that Rusty cast, then it's better not to destroy it. Ununice says that's not quite true. Jill looks at him questioningly. He says that there must be a key that will allow you to dispel the spell. Lilia reports that she thinks so too. The main character imagines a key in his head. Ununice thoughtfully says that a person of Rusty's level, although in fact it is unclear if she was even a person, in any case, she was able to create a perfect magic circle. And although this spell is extremely complex, it was composed in such a way that it can still be dispelled by someone who has mastered holy magic at a certain level, so it must be destroyed. Jill looks at Ununice, who thinks about what all this means, says that the maze is connected with the fallen king. He stands in front of the circle and tells that at the same time he has become a checkpoint through which Rusty herself can pass, or another person who owns magic. In other words, those who definitely do not serve the fallen king. Ununice is going to tell you what it means. Lily and Jill look at the guy, waiting to hear an explanation from him. The guy stands in front of them and is in no hurry to continue. He throws his arms out and says he doesn't even have a clue what exactly that means. From such words, Jill falls face first into the water. All wet, Jill heads to the side and says he's gone to sleep. Ununice holds him and assures him that it's just a harmless joke. Lily laughs. Ununice holds the main character with both hands, dragging after him. Lilia says that Ununice is right about one thing, that they don't know what they don't know. Ununice turns around and says they just don't have any clues. The guy turns to the main character and asks if he is an adventurer, asks what he knows. He turns around. Ununice continues to hang on to him and asks if he learned anything about the maze before he went down into it. The main character replies that he doesn't know anything. Ununice keeps asking if he studied the layout or something. Jill asks Ununice to stop. Because he has never been an adventurer, he was just hired to help. He heard that there are very strong monsters in this maze. Lily looks at them. There are stone columns. Ununice informs the main character that it looks like he doesn't even have an adventurer's license. The main character suddenly screams and calls Ununice names, and then, abruptly, out of anger, just sits down on the ground. Jill, with an angry face, says that Ununice is rotten. Ununice laughs and says that since he entered the forbidden territory, as soon as he leaves, he will be fined. Lilia says she feels even more sorry for him. The guy starts crying. Ununice thinks about it and reports that, to tell the truth, this is also very strange. Lilia agrees. Jill asks them to stop, because they've been talking about this for a long time. The girl says that according to her, he knew too much, as if he wanted to do this to Gil from the very beginning. Ununice thinks about her words. The girl looks at the main character and asks him if he has any ideas why this happened. The angry guy asks how he even knows this. The main character remembers two people, and then says that he does not remember anything that could have caused him to lie. Ununice says it's even hard for him to believe that Jill is just unhappy. The main character asks the one why he thought about it. Lily and Ununice are looking at the guy. Ununice says she thinks it's still possible to bet that Lily and I were thrown here on purpose. He tells Gil that he is the greatest swordsman of their era. He is too important a figure to be here by accident. The guy asks not to exaggerate. He is not that strong because he never managed to defeat the teacher. Ununice says she doesn't know, but she thinks the fact that the guy was able to single-handedly defeat the apocryphal beast makes him one of the strongest. The guy is embarrassed. Ununice recalls that, on top of everything else, he did not even fight at full strength because he simply did not have points. Jill asks him to stop. He says that if he continues, some hermit master will come and beat him for thinking that he is one of the strongest. He represents two big guys who say he's arrogant. Is it possible to call someone a man who can defeat the apocryphal beast? Ununice asks if he spent 4 months in the most difficult maze, because he definitely became stronger than he was before he first entered here. The guy is embarrassed and says that he really fought a lot and thinks that it is. However, suddenly, the guy looks at his finger. He bends down and hits his finger on the stone surface, saying that pride is his enemy. Lilia and Ununice agree. Jill holds a swollen finger and asks if it's fashionable to mock him now. Ununice steps in and suggests that Lilia stop teasing Gil for now. Jill screams, asking about how they dare to play with his self-esteem. The guy says that there are still a lot of things that bother him, so he wants to offer something. Lilia treats Gil's finger, who asks Ununice what he's talking about. Ununice asks the guys how about they all go through this gate together. Jill and Lily are looking at him. Ununice stands with her arms outstretched in front of the main character, who looks at him, waiting for an explanation of her words. Jill thinks about the fact that he originally came here to conquer, but there was a thought to turn back, but he only got deeper. If he had stated that he wanted to return to the surface as soon as possible, it would have been weak of character. The guy clenches his fist and tells Ununice that he is in business, because in any case, this was the original plan. Ununice smiles and asks, what about Lily? She says that if they stay any longer, then everyone will start to worry. The main character tells Lily that she doesn't have to worry, because he thought in advance that they might be a little late. The girl looks at him questioningly. He remembers standing in front of a woman, bending down. The guy had told Arlene in advance that their adventure might take some time. She might not worry for at least 6 months. Lilia thanks the guy for this. Lily and Jill look at Ununice, who informs them that since they have come so far, instead of going to the surface, it will be faster to go down to the bottom, and only then get out of the maze. Jill thinks about it and realizes that teleporting straight to the exit is a good idea. Ununice says that's what he was talking about. The guy points to a spot in the floor where something glitters. The heart of the maze, which contains a sea of mana, is hidden at the deepest level, and a group with a magician can use it to cast a teleportation spell. Ununice puts her hand on herself, saying that it just so happens that they have such a magician. Lilia raises her hand and says that in that case, she is in business. He looks to the side and says that this maze is quite strange. The 3 saints asked him to explore it from the inside, but he doesn't have the opportunity. The guy asks who knows how much time and effort it will take to go down so deep again. He says that most likely they will not have another chance to assemble such a strong group. Jill asks what he means by that. The main character smiles and asks if Ununice wants to tell them to figure it all out on their own. Lilia smiles and says that she and Gil were able to climb to such a depth quite easily. Ununice puts her hand to her heart and informs them that now he is with them, so together they will be simply invincible. He looks up and says that besides the fact that the saints felt the negative energy from here, The Magic Federation made many ominous predictions. When he came down here, he found apocryphal beasts in a magic circle. Ununice says that now he will not be able to get rid of the feeling that something terrible is about to happen. The guy bows his head in front of the guys and asks them if they can help him. Lilia looks at him with a smile. The girl takes the guy by the hands and thanks him for coming to his aid. She is looking forward to the opportunity to work with him. The main character says that he is also very grateful to him because if he had not appeared, they would still be wandering aimlessly through the maze. Jill sighs and then wonders whose sense of direction will now determine the path. Ununice and Lily are going to play a game of rock, paper, scissors, but the main character in shock asks them to stop. Jill waves his hand away and informs him that he will not be able to play this game with them. The girl asks why. The guy replies that he will not be able to see what they show in any way. Ununice tells the guy that, in this case, he can just touch our hands. The main character says that this way they can easily change their choice before he touches them. Lilia and Ununice exchange glances. Jill says he knew they were up to something. The guys start to object, and then the guy says it's not fair. They ask if he doesn't trust his friends at all. Jill understands that she does not want to take such responsibility. The main character understands that if he leads them to the wrong place after such an inspiring speech, then he will be the one to blame for the failure. The guy shouts for them to stop, suggests that they just decide together where to go. He has no desire to be responsible alone. The girl objects and says that Gil himself said not so long ago that they were lost because of him. These words hurt the guy. The main character tilts his head back. Ununice looks at him and asks for permission to be frank. Ununice loudly declares that she can say with all confidence that he is completely useless at this. The main character says that he is also useless. The main character asks why they accused him then. The girl says it's because he's the one who led them. The guy stretches out his hand and says that he has come up with something. He suggests that the guys all go in different directions and then just return to the same place. The guys look at him in silence. The main character, with a serious face, tells them that the one who returns here first will lead everyone. Ununice and Lilia continue to watch him in silence. After that, Ununice is going to express her opinion on this matter. Stone turrets hang from the ceiling. Ununice reports that it sounds insanely exciting. Jill does a countdown and runs ahead. Ununice and Jill are already standing in the same place. Ununice rejoices at the arrival of Lily, and Jill says that he thought he would never see her again. The girl, very tired, looks at the top, holding onto her stick. Ununice came first in just 4 hours, Jill came second in 5 hours, and Lilia came last in almost 9 hours. The girl falls to her knees and begins to cry, folding her hands and raising them in front of her. Lilia screamed with joy in her voice about how happy she was to have returned safe and sound. A tear flows down Ununice's cheek. He says that this is amazing and that this is truly the pinnacle of human development. He applauded and thought, are there really more useless people in this world than him? Meanwhile, Jill is happy that everyone was able to return and that he took second place. After all, the remaining members of the group accuse the main character of being too fickle and not attractive enough. The guy screams that this is slander. The next day, the symbols on the huge door began to glow. Everyone is standing in front of a door that had previously blocked their path, but now it has creaked open, revealing the darkest depths of this maze in front of them. The main character is standing on a stone in the rain, looking up at the sky. He asks if he is even needed here. Lily and Ununice look at him. Now they look at him questioningly. They are located between the rocks. Another month passed, and the adventure went surprisingly well. At the very beginning, the guys behaved quite nicely. Ununice asks with a smile if he can just follow them for the first time until he gets used to everything. Jill and Lily agree. Ununice informs Gil that she saw a monster there. The main character says that he will figure it out now. He screams and swings his sword at the monster. The main character cuts the monster into pieces, after which Lily smiles and looks at the guy in amazement. However, Ununice soon got used to everything. The main character is going to kill the monster with a sword, but magic kills the monster in front of him. Waves are coming from Ununice's hands. He stands in front of the guys. Jill waves at him with the sword and says that he seems to have become stronger, and Lilia says that this is a great job. The guy smiles at the praise. The magical patterns of Ununice appear in the air. The guy demands that the rain clear their path. The guys look up in anticipation. Ununice stands with her hand pointing upwards. After that, a few drops drip onto the ground. Later, the rain has already begun to fall in full force, from which the apocryphal animals are afraid of it and die. Ununice stands contentedly, looking up at the sky, under the rain that he created. The main character and Lily are also getting wet in the rain. Gil let go of his head. He says that thanks to Ununice's magic, they haven't fought any monsters lately. Ununice asks if this is a bad thing. The guy replies that he has not drawn his blade for several days. The main character begins to cry and realizes that now he is completely useless. Lily stands silently, and Ununice looks at the guy questioningly. The girl says that if you think about it, then her protective barrier is also not so necessary anymore. Monsters still do not reach them. Besides, Ununice himself can use something similar. A protective barrier surrounds them from the top. Lilia reports that the fact that they both use the same spells suggests that they are interchangeable. Jill cries and says that now that they mention it, the name of his secret sword technique reminds of the moon, and it is quite closely related to the stars. Ununice puts her hands on herself and starts crying, asking them if they can stop saying such sad things. Jill and Lily look at the guy in shock. After that, the guy still starts smiling. He points his finger at the guys and apologizes because he just felt a little deprived. He is told that he is one of those people who easily get discouraged. Everyone is starting to move forward. Ununice says that he thought it was inevitable, so he was looking forward to meeting the two of them. The guy looks up and admits to them that this is the first time he's been out with someone almost his own age. He is very happy and admits that deep down he is so happy that he can barely restrain himself. It's like they are on an excursion. Lilia happily calls the guy a cutie. Ununice clenches her fist in front of her and asks the guys if they have ever been camping before. Lilia says she was, and it was very tiring. The main character wonders if they are having a picnic, after which he gives a positive answer. Lily and Ununice are looking in different directions. The girl says that she even visited the Great Library when she was little. Ununice says he didn't have anything like that. The main character looks at the guy and asks him if he studied at an institution where they enter at a fairly early age. Ununice denies and says that in his memory, none of his peers ever got there. He remembers how little they stand in front of people. Everything was different for him. He was able to enroll thanks to the connections of his teacher. It is quite rare that someone his age could be in the very heart of such an institution. The girl is happy and asks him if this was his first trip. It must have been very exciting. Ununice replies that it is. They are standing with their hands in the air. Ununice says that right now he really wants to just scream with happiness. Jill asks them not to relax. This is the most difficult maze. He looks up at the top and remembers his words that now they have 3 times more combat power than he had at that time. However, he says that it is impossible to relax here and shouts to the guys that he also wants to be with them. The 3 of them are standing happily. Ununice says there's nothing you can do about it. Objectively speaking, they're the best in their fields. He's not exaggerating a bit when he says they're the strongest band possible. If they still manage to get through this maze, then humanity will have to reach the peak of its abilities. Ununice would even say that the current state of affairs is quite natural. It would be strange if they did not hold back. Lily smilingly informs the guy that he turns out to be very fond of talking. The guy admits that this is because he is a narcissist. Lilia says it's noticeable. The girl reports that the price of their strength is an extremely weak sense of direction. Ununice wouldn't say he's that bad. Jill says the only one who has a problem with it here is herself. The girl says she doesn't want to be the only one. The guys are sitting in front of the campfire. Ununice says he is curious why the S-rank group suddenly stopped on the 3rd floor. He eats fish and admits that it tastes just awful. Lilia asks him again. Ununice explains that they were the best of the best, so in his opinion, they should have gone deeper. The main character denies this. Jill eats fish, but after breaking away, informs the guys that the boss of the 3rd floor was too strong. Ununice and Lily are looking at the guy. He's asked if it was really that difficult. The guy agrees, biting off the fish. He chews his food and looks up at the sky, remembering that at that time he seriously thought about dying. The guy remembers how he fought monsters and says that if we assume that it was an apocryphal beast, then it must be one of the strongest. Ununice asks if Jill wants to say that the beast was stronger than the nightmare. The guy gives a positive answer. Ununice asks him to wait, because this is completely different from what he was once told. The guy looks at him, then thinks about it. The main character tells that it was after he transformed. During the first phase, he was on the same level as a nightmare, but what happened after that was truly terrifying. The guy is standing on a broken stone, fighting a monster that is in the air with several arms and claws. Suddenly, the monster claps its teeth. The guy with glasses looks at how some tentacles are coming from it. The monster takes on a completely different appearance, more intimidating. The main character realizes that he has transformed. A huge ball appeared in the middle of the monster, similar to an eye. If Gil hadn't killed the poisonous dragon before, thereby increasing his rank, he would definitely have lost. Lilia looks at the guy and now understands what he went through then. Jill says he has a feeling that if he hadn't experienced it, he would have died a long time ago. The bonfire continues to burn. The guy says that the experience was very peculiar. He asks the guys if they had anything like this. They give him a positive answer. The girl says that there are many who have never experienced it. She remembers the children and the fact that they constantly asked her if her stories were true. She remembers trying to justify it. She told them that it was true, but they thought it was a lie, and because it was difficult to describe, they asked how she felt then. The girl makes an intimidating appearance and tells the children that she has deceived them. She had to tell them that it was all fiction. The boy called her a liar. Eunice thinks seriously and says that despite the fact that she was not believed, she still told the truth. The girl brings the guy out of his thoughts by addressing him by name. Eunice apologizes. He was just thinking. He reports that he still does not have reliable evidence. Probably he thinks about it too much, asks not to pay attention. Lilia gets a mustache, and she says that this is exactly what a man from a detective novel would say, that he would die soon. Jill agrees with her. The girl sees the next door ahead and reports it, which makes the guy scared and asks if it's his turn now. Eunice laughs with the words that he managed to be the first. They start arguing about whose door it is and laugh. The guys see a new black door in front of them. This is the last door leading to the deepest floor of the most complex maze. It would take 10 whole days to open them. The group happily goes ahead, however. 2 more days after that, 2 of them would have lost their lives. A column of smoke goes up into the sky. A young girl in gloves is sitting next to him, holding her knees. The girl is sitting in the middle of the burnt ruins. A man comes up to her from behind and says that it's a pity that her house burned down. The man hands her a package, telling her it's for her. The girl stretches out her hands to pick it up and thanks the man. Standing next to her, he asks if she is injured. The girl says no, she was doing clerical work at the base group last night. Smoke is coming from the man. He asks the girl if the knights have conducted an investigation. The girl denies this, saying that the Holy Knight said he would look after her. A man with a scar on his arm smokes a cigarette and asks if it's related. The girl asks what he's talking about. The man informs her that he disappeared yesterday. The girl looks at him in shock and asks him about it again. He flicks the ash off his cigarette and tells them that everyone went looking for him, but they never found anything. He puts the cigarette back in his mouth. The man tells Karaha to leave this city. She looks at him questioningly. He says that he received reports that a powerful wizard had descended into the labyrinth. It was the Archmage of the Stars. Initially, their group had only A rank, but because of Godak, he was forcibly promoted. To be honest, the man always believed that such raids were too difficult for them. Things can get even worse. Now the man understands that this story is much more complicated than it might seem at first glance. The girl looks in surprise and asks again if the story is complicated. The man says yes. Clouds of smoke are coming from all the structures. The girl asks what about the rest of the group, because they can't leave. The man continues to smoke, wondering what it even means. He puts his hand on his face. He says that after he took that magic sword in his hands, they all became his subordinates. The man looks down and says that even so, everyone has something they have to protect. He turns to the girl and asks her not to become one of them. It's too early for Karaha to suffer in the depths of his own desires. Someone approaches them and addresses a man named Holand. The girl with glasses says that if that's what he feels, then he should tell her everything. Holand is surprised by her. A girl in a raincoat stands in front of them. Karaha looks at her in silence, and Holand smiles with a cigarette. 2 guys are running somewhere. Over the years, or rather their entire group, has not always been what it has become now. The guys are rapidly running away from a huge monster chasing them. The guy with the dark hair looks back. Suddenly, 2 guys and the monster himself fall off a cliff. One guy is shouting at someone to act. The magician guy starts conjuring some circles, and the second one does something with a staff. Magic stripes appear around the monster, and it gets stuck in the air. They may not have been the strongest, but thanks to strategy and teamwork, they got their way. The guy with the bow, flying upside down, pulls the bowstring. After he released it, the arrow flies towards the monster. He continues to fly down, screaming, looking at this monster. After that, someone grabs the hilt of the sword. The arrow arrives exactly at the chin of the beast with fangs, from which it pushes back. Someone is shouting Godak's name. The magicians look back and order Godak to go into battle. After that, one man throws Godak up with his shield. He pulls the sword out from behind his back, saying that he understood everything. After that, he cuts through the monster with his sword. The whole group of people is happy that they defeated the beast, thanks to teamwork. Holand says it was the best band possible. Holand shakes Godak's hand with a smile. The man talks about how he was completely different once. Holand is sitting at a table with two girls. Holand has a mug in front of him. He talks about how he was a good leader over the years. The girl listens to him attentively. The man takes a mug and informs them that when their group had only a B rank, it was the best time. The rest of their current lineup joined at about the same time. They couldn't reach their full potential in other squads, and their group was like a rehabilitation center for them. Holand remembers Godak's smiling partner. With a sword on his back, he says that Godak was special. Claha asks Holand about why, then, he stabbed one of his comrades in the back. She remembers it. The man says it's a good question. He remembers Godak's sword, which he took out of the water. He is completely sure that it all started the moment he picked up the magic sword. He remembers what happened after that. He examines his magic sword, holding it with both hands. Godak's teammates shout at him that it's time for him to go. Holand looks at him and smokes a cigarette. He looks questioningly at Godak, who is looking at the circle in his sword. Holand reports that he has completely changed. The girls look at him, after which Claha asks Holand about where they found this sword. The man remembered the sword sticking out of the water. They found it at the middle level of the A-rank dungeon, which resembled a water surface. It was called the Face of the Ocean. The girl with glasses remembers reading about something similar in the reports. She asks the man if there was a place with very salty water. Holand gives her a positive answer. The coffee is steaming. The girl says that she does not understand this, but asks if magic swords are found in such places. Holand says that usually not. As a rule, if someone wants to find such a sword, then he goes to comb through the ancient ruins. Holand remembers pointing in front of his finger at the circle on the sword, which shows cracks. The group stands in front of the sword. Holand thought it had been left by one of the dead. The girl asks about it again. He remembers how they fought with a huge snake. In B-rank dungeons like this, if the entire group is dead or has retreated, then most often various items and supplies remain. He remembers the shiny diamond and says that, however, the magic sword is extremely valuable for any group, so there is no chance that it could have been forgotten during the retreat. Claha looks at him in surprise and informs him that his master is definitely dead. Holand agrees with her. He holds this sword in his hands. As soon as he picked it up, the lack of combat power that had been holding them back evaporated, and they received the S rank without any problems. He stands in front of the corpses of the monsters he killed alone. His teammates are standing behind him and looking at them. The man stands with his back to Godak. Holand says that since then something has become wrong with Godak. The man continues to smoke a cigarette, looking back at Godak. He walks without turning around. Holand looks at him in disbelief. Holand remembers how they used to mimic each other when they were children, standing next to a woman. Even though he had known him for a very long time, he still had those he needed to protect. A man imagines himself standing next to a small self and a year old. He submitted his resignation from the band before something irreparable happened. He remembers the circle on the sword again and how he entered the room. The children are screaming that their dad has come. They wish him a welcome. Holand sees his whole family in front of him, at a table with food, and also a man sitting with them, behind whom stands his sword. She smiles maliciously and tells the man that he has a very wonderful family. The children are happily eating something with 2 chopsticks, and the mother, in an apron, looks at them with a smile and rejoices. The man removes the sword from his shoulder. He tells Holand that he is looking forward to the opportunity to continue working with him. The man reciprocates. Holand holds a mug and smokes, saying that everyone has their loved ones. The girl remembers sitting on the ground, surrounded by people. She asks if that's why no one lifted a finger when he attacked Gil. Holand thinks about it and then replies that he thinks it is. The girl with glasses replies that it's not surprising that no one let it slip. Claha raises his hand and asks that even though they asked for it themselves, but is it okay to tell them everything about his family? The man takes a sip from the mug, looking at the girl, and then closes his eyes and thinks about her question. He reports that the holy knights have been hanging around their house for several days now, and if he appears, he does not think that they will just stand and watch, asks if he is right. The girl with glasses smiles and says that he has a sharp eye and reinforcements arrived a few days ago. Holand sings from a mug with one eye closed. After that, he wants to ask something, so he puts the mug on the table with a bang. He looks at the girl standing in front of him and asks her how all these incidents are related to them. They both look at each other with serious faces. Holand asks why the church decided to join the game. The girl thinks about it and reports that the higher ranks of the Holy Knights suspect that the fallen king is involved in all this. Claha looks at the girl in shock, who continues to remain unperturbed, and Holand also looks at her in fright. Something is falling on the pal. The man asks what she's talking about. He holds out his hand and says, "It's just a fairy tale." He strains himself and asks how the apocryphal writings of 1,000 years ago are related to what is happening now. Claha asks in surprise if the fallen king really still exists. The girl understands their perplexity. Holand says that even now he does not have a clear answer to how the fallen king is involved in recent events. The girl with glasses says that, however, the three saints suggested just that. She represents three sitting girls. She represents a certain symbol and tells us that, like the Magic Empire, they also had similar predictions. Ununice is standing there. She tells me that one of those seers, the famous archmage, Holand, sits with his hands released. The man raises his head and covers his face with his hand. He asks them if they want to say that he is also somehow connected with the fallen king. The girl informs him that so far they are sticking to this version. Claha looks at her in surprise. She looks at the trembling mug. This is just a hypothesis, but if we consider all the events in chronological order, the girl thinks that the magic sword that she found belonged to the fallen king. Suddenly, Claha holds on to the table. She gets up from the table, which makes everyone look at her in disbelief. Claha notices again that the mug is shaking. The girl asks them if they feel it too. They agree with her and ask what kind of noise it is. White smoke appears in the middle of the town. The whole group got up from the table and went outside to understand what was going on, and together they look at the top. Holand looks at it in shock and tries to figure out what it is. At first, he notices just a bird's wing at the top. A huge bird opens its toothy beak. She flies in the sky, pointing her clawed paw forward. Everyone understands that this is an apocryphal beast. The main character cuts the monster in half with a sword, killing it, but at the same time being surprised at how strong it turned out to be. Ununice looks at Gil, claps her hands, and says that he doesn't seem to be of any use right now. Jill smiles. The main character puts the sword on his shoulder and looks at Ununice with a smile, telling him that he understands him now. Several more monsters are flying at Gil. He grabs his sword. Ever since they passed through the second gate, he had a clear feeling. Jill first kills one monster with a jerk, leaving behind a second one that looks at them. Jill kills the monster by chopping off its head. The main character realizes that the beasts have become too strong. Their level has changed dramatically. Ununice's high-level magic is useless against them, although he would not want to rush to conclusions. But everyone can easily compete with that giant horse, and against the background of those they have met before, they are absurdly strong. He continues to chop down monsters. If one of the beasts could break out of the gravitational core of the maze and get out, it would easily destroy an entire settlement. Jill sighs and looks away. After that, he looks up and asks the guys if they agree that this is a really deep maze. They pass it on and realize that they are already on about the 70th floor. They are interested in how many floors there are in total. They stop. The main character thinks that there are about 200 floors. Ununice says he thinks there are 216 of them. He is asked where such accuracy comes from. He replies that it is 6 in a cube. Lilia lifts her head up and says that she thinks they have almost reached the end. The guys look at her in silence. The girl gets embarrassed and says she just has a feeling. The main character grins and says that the saint is talking about a premonition. Ununice laughs and says this is a very valid point. Jill and Ununice run away from an angry Lily. Jill asks the archmage what he was thinking at all. Ununice apologizes, saying that when he is too far from the stars, his intuition begins to fail. Ununice says he feels much better when he's at home. The girl hits Gil on the cheek, causing him to fall to the ground. He lies and thinks about whether this is exactly what the passage of an adventurer should be. Lilia says that adventurers have a hard time. Eunice reports that this is definitely not a place where he would like to spend a lot of time, only if he didn't have such reliable companions as Jill and Lilia by his side. The main character looks up. Jill realizes that most likely, if he had continued to walk with that group, he would never have gotten as far. He lies and thinks that it's not that they're bad adventurers, but given their fighting skills, there's no denying that they wouldn't have the strength to deal with several of the beasts on this floor. It was only because there were 3 of them that they were able to get so deep into this maze. Jill says that in the end, it all makes sense. Lilia looks at the guy questioningly after hearing his words. Jill apologizes, explaining that it's just thinking out loud. Lily looks at the main character and informs him that he talks too much to himself. The guy thinks about it and wanted to object to the girl, but she suddenly leans over to him and says that it's like that. Lilia reminds him of phrases such as, "I see, so that's why," and all sorts of different ones, asks if he has already forgotten this. The guy says it's quite possible. Eunice smiles. Eunice says with admiration that he is jealous. It is a pity that he did not manage to join the adventure earlier. This is childish naivety. The girl says it's rather cute. The guy says he's always dreamed of finding friends his own age. Lilia looks at her friends with a smile and suggests that they write to each other even after they get out of here. The girl looks at the main character and tells him that this also applies to him. He looks at her questioningly. She smiles, and he asks if she's telling the truth. She points her finger at him and says that a heartless man has got into their cute squad. The guy denies this, because as soon as they get out, he will continue to travel, so it is unlikely that the letters will reach. The girl imagines how the letter moves between the islands. She says that then the guy can just tell her where he's going so she can send him straight to the local branch. Jill asks if it is possible. The girl gives a dubious, positive answer. Lilia points her finger at the main character's face and tells him with a smile that her handwriting is so cute that he will be just shocked. The girl removes her finger, and the guy rubs this place. Eunice, with tears of happiness in her eyes, asks Gil if he can do the same. He points his finger at him and tells him that he will send 7 letters a week with a cipher, so they will delay him for a long time. Jill asks him why he likes to complicate things so much. Eunice and Lilia stand in front of the main character, waiting for his answer. The guy is confused and thinks what to answer. Jill tells them that he doesn't mind in principle. After his answer, Lily and Eunice start to smile. The guys are standing in front of a huge door with an eye at the top and looking at it. It wasn't that bad. They head forward and discuss that if you believe Lilia's words, they will soon pass the maze. It took quite a long time. The girl says that she no longer feels her legs. The guys raise their hands. Jill asks them not to relax too much. Eunice and Lily agree with him. The guy puts his hand on the wall and asks if they are ready. Eunice, with a smile, and Lily, pointing her fists forward, inform him that they are always ready. The guy looks at them with a smile. The main character remembers how he fell into the abyss and begins to compare the current situation with the beginning of the path. He realizes that the adventure is not so bad now. The main character puts his other hand on the door. Jill presses on the door and orders Sesame to open. His friends are watching behind him. There's something clacking in the door. The main character looks forward in shock, sees some glowing balls, and then something hurts him very badly, cutting off half of his body, from which he falls down. The main character notices an unknown flash of light in the open door in the dark. The guy pushes Eunice away with his hand, which makes him look at him in disbelief. Eunice falls to the ground, and Jill wants to take up the sword. However, he does not have time, and his arm is cut off. While Eunice continues to fall after the push, the main character has already been left without half of his torso, and also begins to fall. Eunice notices a dark silhouette in the dark, appearing next to the main character. It turned out to be a bird surrounded by light. The bird opens its beak, and a magic ball appears, after which it rushes at Eunice, from which he is shocked. The monster shoots a piercing beam from its beak, aiming at Eunice, but Lilia manages to protect the guy in time. Lily, with a tense face, continues to hold her hands, restraining the bird's attack. Stone fragments fly at her. Suddenly, she is illuminated by a sharp flash of light, from which she throws her head back. Eunice watches in shock. The main character turns to the stars. He is lying on the floor, with a wound through his mouth. He pulls his burned hand up, addressing the stars in the east and ordering them to prostrate themselves. A ray of light is directed at the guy, which he cannot restrain. The main character's head falls to the floor, and Eunice continues to hold back the flash of light. A small magic ball makes a clicking sound. Circles and various symbols begin to appear on the floor, forming a huge clock. Eunice couldn't hold back the flash of the monster's light. The second hand on the clock starts to shake. The second hand makes a backward movement, rewinding the time a little. Thus, time was rewound for a second. The main character's severed head lies on the floor. He looks up, but his eyes begin to close. There is only one thing left inside his body, as well as inside his fading consciousness. The guy opens his eye. Jill looks at the white silhouette next to her and realizes that this is his soul. The main character looks at her in surprise. He and his soul are looking at the flash above, towards this blinding light, the source of which seemed about to explode. The main character just extended his hand. Jill stares at the flash of light with her eyes wide open. His soul stands calmly in front of the flash. It was as if Gil was trying to grab onto his own soul with his hand. In a position he had imagined countless times, the soul begins to move forward, raise its hand, leaving traces of itself behind. The guy's soul takes up the sword. All this happens in a pose that he has visualized an infinite number of times before. The guy keeps reaching for him. The main character's soul reaches out with his hand to the sword, after which the hand finally reaches the hilt of the sword. With this very hand, countless times before, with cracks on his fingers, the soul grabs a sword. The main character with a sword makes a sharp leap forward. He uses his killer technique. The guy runs forward and then begins to draw a sword from its scabbard, from which small lightning bolts emanate. The main character looks at that bird, then says that this is a secret sword technique. He squeezes the hilt of the sword harder. The guy imperceptibly makes a swing of the sword, which leaves a trail. He tears the bird in half. After that, the guy raises his sword in order to attack the bird again. He cuts it open once more. The main character looks at her without emotion, pointing the sword forward. This is called the moon dream. The bird, divided into two parts, falls to the floor next to the main character, who is sitting on his knees. Jill puts his hand on the floor, bends down, and begins to choke, tears running down his cheeks. The guy with shocked eyes covers his tear-stained face with his hand, not understanding what has just happened. He only remembers that as soon as the boss entered, the boss managed to catch him off guard with just one attack. The guy remembers the light in the dark. He looks at his hand and thinks about what happened. The main character is brought out of his thoughts by Lily's cry with a request that Eunice not move. The guy turns back in surprise. Jill is shocked to see a wounded Eunice lying on the floor and laughing, after which she says that he has fixed everything. The girl gives him first aid. Suddenly, the guy feels pain after his words and moans. The girl tells him that she asked him to be silent. The main character looks at Eunice and Lily in a stupor. After that, Eunice breathes a sigh of relief. Now he is smiling and beaming, saying that he already thought that he was definitely finished. All three of them are sitting on the floor. Eunice says that he actually died then. Everything is exactly as Jill said. Pride is your enemy. The frustrated protagonist is sitting in front of Eunice, holding his knees. Eunice says that from now on she will try her best to live in humility. Scared, Jill turns to the guys and asks them about what happened then. Jill looks in shock at the guy who informed him that he had turned back time, just for 1 second. Lilia understands what he said, and looks at him, asking if this is the new kind of magic he was talking about back then. Eunice says with a smile that everything is correct. This is the main reason why he was recognized as an archmage. With his fingers, Eunice conjures strips and balls, informing him that this is a new technique that he found on the border of the stars. He admits that in fact, he usually has to pay much more attention to the location of the stars and make a lot of troublesome preparations to do this. He remembers what happened this time. Eunice smiles and says that this time he managed to do everything with his pure strength. He talks about what it means, that he can only rewind for a short period of time, so he's really glad that Jill was able to defeat the boss in the second that he gave him. Jill listens to him attentively. The guy smiles and says that he is grateful that all their efforts were not in vain in the end. He turns to Lilia, tells her that if she hadn't protected him, he wouldn't have been able to fully activate the spell. The girl is smiling. He puts his hand on his chest, saying that the organs that he had to blow up as payment would not be restored. The main character rubs the area under his nose with his finger and laughs, but after that, he asks Eunice to stand up. Jill looks at the guy questioningly and asks him about his organs. Eunice looks at the guy questioningly and then understands, reminding him that they are in a maze. He looks at the walls of the maze and tells that he had to use this spell in a place where there is no mana of the stars. Ununice remembers activating the spell and says that's why then the only thing he would be able to use was his life force. Ununice raises her head up and asks the guys if they are amazed by this result, after which she begins to laugh. The guy says that his insides burst at that moment just like a balloon. The main character is horrified by this. He says that thanks to Lilia, he feels great, people should call her a great saint. The girl says with a smile that this is a good idea, because they have a great hero and an archmage here. She is the only one without a cool nickname, but she thinks about it. Lily looks up and says that she can't be called that yet, not after this. After that, someone starts laughing. Jill sighs in fright and says that he thought he would be left without a head, although he would have been if it hadn't been for Ununice. Lily, with a tortured look, says that she is completely exhausted. She does not even want to move. Ununice smiles and raises her head, saying that it is getting quite difficult. He stares at the ceiling in silence. The main character thanks both of his friends. Together, they continue to sit on the floor. Jill and Ununice look at the guy, from which he awkwardly turns away and says that you're welcome. Gil looked into Ununice's eyes. Meanwhile, Ununice asked the guy if he could continue to defeat floor bosses, as he had done before. Gil was surprised by what Ununice said. The guy shook his head negatively and sighed. Gil lowered his head sadly. The young man replied that, to be honest, he did not know at all what to do in such a situation. Gil frowned heavily and said that he had just defeated one of the bosses with the wake-up effect. Ununice smiled and replied that he understood what the guy was talking about. Gil asked if they had ever had such an experience. Lilia smiled and replied positively. The girl said that her strength had also increased significantly. Gil thought that at that moment he could have used the time rewind again, because of the effect of waking up immediately after death. The young man's eyes widened. It occurred to him that this was the third time he had done this. This phenomenon is called knowledge. Although it's different for everyone, they've definitely heard about it before. Ununice exclaimed and stated that he had had it 3 times. Lilia chuckled and added that she was also a member of their team of 3. Gil thought that whether it was a situation where the situation was at stake, at this moment when a person was undergoing a severe test, or when he realized something unimaginable. And by touching the great truth, in such cases, a person receives knowledge. His abilities increase significantly in this case. And for a short time, he enters the awakening state, in which a person usually does the impossible. The blow that Jill made to change the outcome of the battle was due to this phenomenon. In addition, everyone has increased their rank. This is what allowed them to experience such significant and rapid growth, putting them on a completely different level. Of course, if they had continued to develop at the same pace, they would have had the opportunity to achieve a similar level of strength. However, as the time that would have to be spent on this path becomes less and less, the fact that someone has had such an experience significantly affects the true abilities of warriors and magicians. Ununice suggested that they go back in such a situation. He looked into Gil's eyes. Gil said that after gaining knowledge, a person's abilities are greatly enhanced. He asked if the awakening effect would dissipate then. Ununice replied that, most likely, yes. Lilia also added that she thinks the same way. Gil thought that perhaps he had just reached the same level of strength that his master had at the time when they were fighting the poison dragon. The young man asked them if they were sure that they would be able to live if they faced the boss of this floor without awakening the effect. Gil stated in all seriousness that he would not be able to do this. He thought about when a ray of light split him into 2 halves. The young man believed that this was because he was too careless. After all, at the moment of full concentration, he was swatted like a fly. The world is huge, but Gil still lacks experience, and he understands all this perfectly well. The guy said that as long as the person is alive, there is hope. He suggested that it might take them quite a while to get back to the surface. Gil raised his head and said with all confidence that despite this, it would be much better than not coming back at all. Ununice lowered his head and replied that he thought it was a pretty reasonable decision and he would like to make it. He turned to Lilia and asked her if she knew anything. She turned around and looked at him in surprise. Ununice asked the girl if the floor boss that Jill killed was an apocryphal beast and how strong he was. Lilia replied that it was an average apocryphal beast. Gil was extremely amazed by what he had just heard from her. The girl added that, moreover, in terms of combat abilities, he was below average. Gil looked up at the top and fell silent. He couldn't believe what he had just heard from Lilia. The young man thought with horror what all this could mean. After a while, the girl began to talk about who the Orkies were. It was a special kind. Lilia was asked if they were magical birds. She replied that just bird would be enough. The girl added that, in any case, they are a weaker form of instas. Lilia believed that they also belonged to birds, and such creatures, as a rule, usually fall in a pack. One of the main problems when fighting such an opponent is precisely the members of the pack of the lower order, and they are also incredibly difficult to kill. After all, each such bird hides behind more powerful apocryphal beasts. Lilia added that it was all according to Rusty. She took her staff in her hands and brought it down with the end, tapping it. The girl said that if you destroy the commander, then it will be much easier to win in this case. Ununice thought about it and asked if it would really get easier in this case. Gil, on the other hand, was confused and did not quite understand what Lilia was telling him. Ununice smiled and asked if Rusty had always been so open. The girl replied that she herself would be interested to know about it. Gil looked at them in surprise and did not understand what kind of bird they were talking about. He shouted at them to stop. The young man added that there were no bosses in the boss's room. Lilia looked at him. Gil smiled and suggested that maybe it was a completely different species. The girl replied that she was absolutely sure of what she had said. She asked if he knew that all apocryphal animals have a certain number on their bodies, which can tell which species they belong to, and this is definitely Orkies. Gil was visibly agitated, and sweat ran down his face. He thought that judging the apocryphal beast in terms of strength, it was clearly a little weaker than the others. Gil asked if this was really the case, and then immediately laughed. The guy thought that he could only accept everything. Lilia asked how he was feeling. The girl came closer to him and asked Gil if he was feeling depressed right now. The guy hesitantly replied that he didn't. He thought that the apocryphal beast had easily killed him, only the strongest among the weakest. And this is even despite the fact that Gil has been learning humility all the time. The guy lowered his head and sadly replied that he did not feel depressed. He decided that he had clearly overestimated his own strength. Gil succumbed to his own pride, and he has no choice but to just accept it. Lilia told him not to get upset. The guy began to convince her that everything was fine. Ununice exclaimed that the guy was very cool. There are people who never admit defeat and only get stronger, but Gil is not like that. He decided that he needed to put aside his unreasonable pride. A guy should think of this as a starting point. Gil thought that he simply had to accept this fact and draw the appropriate conclusions. He thought about it and said that in this case it turns out that even after gaining knowledge, they cannot cope with the great apocryphal beast. Lilia and Ununice listened in silence. Jilla. Ununice came closer to the guy and slapped him on the shoulder. He told the young man not to lose heart. Gil replied that he was fine. Ununice replied that, in that case, it was another reason why they should all return. If they were to encounter the great apocryphal beast next time, then it would clearly be over for them. Knowledge is not a panacea at all, even if there is an attempt to fix this a second or even a third time. Ununice replied that he agreed. But there was one thing, but. Lilia asked him if he knew anything. The guy thought about it and replied that yes. Ununice turned to Gil. He asked the guy if he had said that he had killed the boss from the 3rd floor. Gil looked at him in obvious surprise and replied that he was. Ununice added that he didn't just die, but Gil killed him himself. The young man confirmed his words. Gil added that, as he said, the room collapsed because he attacked with his magic ball. And while they were disappearing into the abyss, Gil somehow managed to kill the boss. Ununice interrupted him and said that in that case, it turns out that he fell with Gil from the 3rd floor. And not only did he not die as soon as he left his place of residence, Ununice asked if he had fought him in such a case. Gil replied that it was true. They fell out of the room. The guy didn't say anything and abruptly stopped. He put his hand over his mouth and fell silent. Ununice asked if that boss had a number. Jin answered him uncertainly that he was. Gil wrote the number LX Vili and turned around, looking directly at Ununice. Ununice turned to Lilia. The girl immediately replied that she understood. She said that he is one of the weakest beasts, but he is still quite strong. Lilia added that he is even stronger than a nightmare. Ununice lowered his head and said that, in other words, the monster that Gil killed was not the boss of the 3rd floor at all. Gil was sweating profusely, and he was amazed at what Ununice had just said. The deeper you go into the maze, the stronger the floor bosses will be, and there are no exceptions to this rule. However, depending on the abilities of each of them, the difficulty of winning may vary. This means that the amount of mana contained in their bodies increases with each floor. Ununice said that, in other words, the fact that Gil faced a similar opponent on the third floor is extremely strange. And all this is just the tip of the iceberg. Gil sat and listened to him. He was in complete disarray. Floor bosses cannot leave their rooms. Ununice didn't know exactly how it worked, but that's the point of the maze. Ununice noticed that even the average apocryphal beasts are subject to this rule. The guy added that until Gil opened the door, Orcus was not going to attack. He found this surprising, whereas even the apocryphal beast, which is weaker than him, was able to get out of his room. On top of that, he transformed and revealed his true form. Ununice came to the conclusion that the most obvious conclusion is that the boss of the third floor is an apocryphal beast who has freed himself from the power of the labyrinth. Gil looked at Ununice in surprise. Meanwhile, the guy continued and said that this situation can also be looked at from another angle. Gil asked him how. Ununice suggested that the shackles of the labyrinth might be loosening. Gil asked if this was true, then they couldn't maintain that amount of mana outside the maze. Ununice replied that he had absolutely no idea. He said that long before they were born, there was an era of Apocrypha, then the atmosphere was just overflowing with mana, and the monsters could be safely on the surface. They were the natural enemies of humanity. Gil exclaimed and asked if it wasn't a long time ago. He wondered if Ununice really thought that something like this could happen in their reality. Ununice replied that in the worst case, yes. Gil was stunned, and his eyes widened in surprise. Ununice continued. He said that the reality is that right now, an apocryphal beast lies in front of them, an ancient creature that came straight out of the annals of history. Ununice wanted to continue, but Gil interrupted him and said that it turns out the era of the Apocrypha could happen again. He put his hands on his head and looked down. The young man asked if it was possible to exclude this possibility in this case. Gil thought that this fact simply did not fit into his head. He asked if it could just be a prejudice. The guy asked if it was possible that the third floor was just special. Gil looked at Lilia and asked her what she thought about all this. The girl thought deeply and frowned. Lilia said that several pages had been lost from the Apocrypha. Gil was taken aback and asked her about it. The girl replied that 700 years ago there was a fire in the Great Library, and part of the original scripture burned to the ground. However, it did not only affect him. The first 7 copies were the same. And starting with the second manuscript, everything is so vague that it is impossible to say what was actually written. When Lilia reread them as a child, she often thought of the missing points. For example, was the fallen king killed, or how Rusty fought them? Now the girl finally knows the whole truth. She added that Rusty couldn't kill the fallen king, she only imprisoned him in this place. Gil couldn't believe what he had just heard from the girl. Ununice smiled and added that he was of the same opinion. He said that this place was clearly created by someone. It was formed on the basis of the structure that Rusty created, and the emanations of the fallen king are sealed here, in this pseudo-labyrinth. Ununice added that perhaps the description of this place was on those pages that perished in the fire. Lilia suggested that it was also possible that someone had burned them. Ununice said nothing. Gil said it all meant that the shackles were loosening. He asked if the monsters were trying to break out in this case. Lilia replied that she did not. She suggested that, most likely, everything is much more serious. The girl declared with horror that the seal of the maze was about to break. Gil looked up at her in surprise. Meanwhile, cracks were indeed appearing in the seal. Gil asked if the seal would break. He looked at Lilia. The young man asked what would happen if the printer broke down. Ununice thought about it, and he said that, of course, it would not end there. After all, the apocryphal beasts trapped inside the maze, including not only the average, but even the great apocryphal beasts that they have yet to meet. They will be released to the surface at the same time. Ununice added that if something like this happens, there's nothing they can do. It's going to be over. Lilia said that's not all. If the fallen king wakes up, the world will overflow with mana. The girl added that then the civilization they know her will be destroyed, as it happened in the distant past with their predecessors. Gil looked at her in horror. Gil was at a complete loss. He looked up and shouted that in that case, this was another reason why they should return. The guy said they just couldn't hide such important information from the rest of the world. Gil added that they definitely need to get out of the maze somehow and tell everyone what they have learned. The young man noticed that there was no denying the fact that they were all strong, but this does not mean that you can become the best because of it. Gil said they needed to overcome their own pride and get someone to help. The young man stopped and looked at Lilia and Ununice. They lowered their gaze and silently listened to the guy. The guy was alarmed by how he saw them drooping. Gil asked if they had run out of time. Ununice said a total solar eclipse was coming soon. He noticed that he himself had a high mana density that day. Ununice assumed that the seal would collapse just then, or that someone on the surface would make the first move. Gil asked again. Ununice said that this city also has a cathedral. Ununice has always wondered why the cathedral is so huge. He said that if this is the key link that supports printing on the surface, then in this case there will be the following. Ununice had not finished speaking when Gil suddenly interrupted him. The young man asked Ununice in horror if he wanted to say that someone was planning to destroy the cathedral. Ununice replied that such an outcome was quite possible. Lilia said that the follower of the fallen king, who got rid of the powerful swordsman in advance, got so close to the cathedral. She suggested that, most likely, this was done in order to make sure that their plan would go through without mistakes. Gil thought of Godak. Ununice said he screwed up with Gil after all. He said it was time for them to go anyway. Lilia said they really needed to move out. Ununice added that although his sense of time is slightly distorted, he thinks that the solar eclipse will happen in 3 days, at noon. He doesn't know how many more floors they have to go through, but if they don't have time to seal this place again before then it will be over. Lilia looked at Gil and addressed him. She said it had nothing to do with him. Gil looked at her in surprise. Lilia looked at him with all seriousness and said that she and Juris had come here for a mission. She added that if any of them left, they definitely wouldn't be able to seal the fallen king again. The girl turned to Gil and said that he was not needed for this mission. Gil lowered his head. He thought that from now on, there was no longer any guarantee of survival, although it was like that before. And if they were unlucky enough to encounter the great apocryphal beast next, it wouldn't even be a matter of life and death. In this case, they will only face certain death. Lilia bowed and thanked Gil for coming so far with them. She smiled and added that the guy had already done enough. The young man was in complete disarray. He reflected that he had to face his own weaknesses in this maze. For example, the inability to fight normally without glasses. Not only has Jill lost his life, but he also won't be able to protect his friends. He said he was going to tell me something, and maybe not quite reasonable. The young man noticed that it was terrible because they didn't have much time left before the eclipse. Ununice said they still have a very long way to go. Gil said nothing. Lilia looked at him with concern. Ununice realizes that the guy has no reason to fight anymore. Even so, he told Gil that he was begging him to risk his own life to save the world. Ununice asked him to take them to the lowest floor. Gil could feel his heart fluttering, but not because of anything other than the fear of huge responsibility and burden. Gil knelt down and held out his hands. He said that he only knows about his ability to swing a sword. Lilia asked him if the guy really thinks so. Gil noticed that he had a terrible sense of direction, and if no one is with him, he will never see the sky again. Lilia smiled and thanked the guy. Gil was taken by the hands of Lilia and Ununice so that the guy could stand up. He thought that he had completely forgotten that he had come to this maze to go through it. Ununice and Lilia were smiling and glad that Gil had decided to continue his journey with them. And so the 3 young men continued on their way. Although their steps weren't as light as before, they seemed to be full of hope for some reason. Someone asked which road they would choose, and the other replied that he would rely on his own intuition. Meanwhile, Claha was thinking about how she had heard the same name many times as a child. Namely, it was a formidable enemy from ancient writings, a servant of the fallen king, an apocryphal beast. At that time, he arrived in the city. Arlene looked up and couldn't believe what she was seeing. The fragments that the monster left behind flew at her. She wondered if the fallen king had awakened again. The girl quickly discarded these thoughts and decided that now was not the time to think about it at all. She quickly moved forward and told Claha to hurry up too, as they needed to get to the cathedral as soon as possible. Otherwise, only a scorched piece of land will remain of this city. Claha shouted that she understood everything. She remembered how Holand had told her to go with Arlene, as he would return when he found his family. In her mind, she thought about what she needed to do first. She was thinking about Gil, Godak, Holand. She remembered how Jill had stayed in the maze. Claha was desperate. She wanted someone to give her a helping hand. The girl looked ahead. Claha stopped. Arlene turned to look at her. Claha told her to go ahead. Meanwhile, the city was in chaos. Many residents fled and tried to escape, while everything began to gradually collapse. Karaha noticed a little girl lying on the ground near the destroyed building. She asked if her mom was okay and couldn't find her. Gorky's girl was crying and looking around in horror. Karaha went up to her and took a stick to remove the remnants of the devastation. She said she would help now. Karaha removed the large stone and hugged the girl closer to her. Karaha thought about what she needed to do now in such a situation. The girl recalled that in the case of Gil, she was never able to give him a helping hand. Karaha smiled and asked the girl if she could get up. The girl took her hand and thanked her. Karaha thought that everything would be different now. The girl put the girl on her back. She turned around and was surprised to find that behind them on the right and left were two monsters that looked like huge spiders. One of the monsters rushed straight at them. Karaha thought about how the monsters from the maze could get in here. The girl decided that she needed to fight back against them. But I thought that it would be useless now, and I needed to run away immediately. Karaha saw a huge monster getting closer in front of her. At this time, two people appeared and stood in front of the girl. One of them noticed the girl. He turned around and called out to her. The man with blonde hair came closer to Karaha and the girl. The second man asked if they were all right. Holand came up later. He smoked a cigarette and said that they had almost reached the cathedral, and all that remains is to help the wounded. Karaha noticed him and called out. He turned around and was very surprised to see her here. The man Karaha had seen earlier approached Holand. He roughly grabbed him by the collar and asked what it all meant. Karaha hesitantly tried to answer something, but she was interrupted. The blond man was shouting that Holand should have made her escape. Holand took his hand away and replied that there was nothing else for him to do. He clutched his head and added that it didn't matter anymore. The man noticed that in the end he even tried to get her to go along with the Holy Knights, but apparently it didn't work. Holand continued and said that he was sure that Karaha would not agree. It doesn't matter what they do or how they do it. The man smiled and said that it was because the girl looked like them. He looked at her and added that Karaha was just as weak and inexperienced. But nevertheless, she is not afraid to go forward, just like they used to be. They couldn't give up on their dreams. Holand recalled how they spent time together, led by Godak. No matter how much they pulled away from her, she continued to look for another way. Holand said that Karaha is quite stubborn and very persistent, unwilling to back down. The man added that Karaha would definitely become a great adventurer one day. The girl looked at him and was discouraged. The other guy said that's why Karaha had to leave town before something like this happened. He shouted that she should have done it before she rotted through like all of them. Before Karaha would be in such fetters that it is impossible to get out. Before she would have turned into as pathetic a version of herself as they are now. Everyone listened in silence with their heads down. The guy began to be comforted. His friend put his hand on his head. Holand lit another cigarette. Karaha looked at them. And with all confidence, she told everyone that she was not going to run away. Everyone was surprised. Holand chuckled and said that everything happened as he said. Karaha asked uncertainly if that didn't apply to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come here in all their weapons. She asked them if they would still fight. The guy shouted that yes. She exclaimed and turned to everyone, asking if they wouldn't do it, then who would? He talked about the fact that their families live in this city, and they just have to protect their loved ones. Holand smoked in silence and thought that he agreed with everything. He recalled when they were sitting together and discussing something. He remembered the days when they sat with Godak and the others. Godak was asked if the guild was important to him. He replied that he did. He said that he could find the support he needed here. The man believed that they should help the next generation to do the same. He wanted to become a cornerstone for someone who would continue their path and go even further. Holand recalled how he gave the name of their guild. The man shouted that if they couldn't defend their own city, then they had no right to be called S-rank. Holand told everyone that they needed to show their determination. Plan for the future. Maybe they've lost their pride. Holand looked at the little girl who had found her parents and Karaha, who was waving at her. The man called out to her and told her not to dare to die. Karaha replied that she understood everything. Thus, the S-rank adventurers made their move, resolutely entering the battle. Everyone moved into battle and began to dock one of the monsters. Holand shouted for the archers to follow him as he needed to shoot them from a height. Karaha told everyone to calm down and go to the cathedral, as there is a place to hide. Suddenly, one of the monsters managed to slip through. He started walking straight towards Karaha. The girl noticed him and threw a small bag at him. Immediately, a blinding flash of light appeared. Karaha turned away and closed her eyes, as it was too bright. The girl used a light grenade, which can slow down the monster for a short time. But it was more than enough. Karaha shouted to the others that it was now possible to go, since the path had already become clear. Holand shouted that 5th Street had already been cleared, and they needed to retreat now. He said he needed help in the eastern area. Holand added that they already had a whole bunch of arrows, and told the others to keep shooting, since no monster should leave. One of the guys replied that he understood everything. At this time, the archers continued to shoot at the monsters without stopping. Karaha stopped for a moment to catch her breath. She wiped the sweat from her face and looked up at the top. The girl noticed how Holand was showing her the class, which meant that the girl had done a good job. She smiled at his hand. Karaha looked at him and saw the apocryphal beast flying straight at them. Her eyes widened and she was terrified. The girl immediately shouted to Holand to turn around. Suddenly, a huge monster in the form of a bird appeared next to him. Everyone here had already fallen when the monster landed. Holand saw the ferocious bird trying to attack. He thought that her feathers must be made of steel. Holand continued to fall, looking to the side. He saw that Karaha also could not resist. Both fell to the ground. Karaha asked if Holand was okay. He took hold of his head and replied that everything was fine. The man thanked the girl for saving him one way or another. Holand frowned heavily and told the girl that there was something much more important right now. The man asked her to pack up. After all, they are now facing death itself. The same huge monster appeared in front of him. Both were tense, looking straight at him. Suddenly, a voice came from somewhere. Holand asked who was here. Someone said they finally got the monster's attention. Karaha called out to Holand, but the man interrupted her and said it was too early. Holand heard someone shout that he needed to act now. He noticed that the monster was surrounded by magicians. They used their magic, using energy directly against the monster. Thus, the magicians tied him up and held him. Karaha shouted joyfully that they had caught the monster. Holand said it was too early to be happy. He ordered everyone to shoot the monster while he was immobilized and not give him time to think. Holand told them to cover him with a barrage of arrows. The sounds of many arrows were heard, which were aimed at the monster. Karaha was watching everything carefully. She thought that they were aiming at his wings from all sides, as this is a standard tactic of fighting flying monsters. Holand shouted for the archers to keep shooting and not stop. He also took the bow himself and continued to aim at the monster. He was thinking that no matter how strong his feathers were, they still wouldn't save him from being shot at point-blank range. Suddenly, a realization came to Karaha. She shouted for Holand to stop, and it was all a mistake. She thought that instas are dragons after all. The girl said that the monster was going to breathe fire. At the same moment, a torrent of fire descended on everyone. The monster let him in. Holand did not have time to react, when suddenly Karaha covered him, who was trying to take the fire on herself. The man exclaimed. He didn't understand what the girl was doing here. Holand told her to leave immediately. Meanwhile, Karaha was smiling and told him to hit the monster's weak spot. Holand gritted his teeth and said that Karaha was such a stupid. Karaha was thinking that the most important thing is to know which cards are in your hands. No matter how useless they may seem at first glance, there always comes a time when they can definitely be useful in any situation, and then the right card will appear, which you definitely need to protect. And in a team battle, it will be Karaha herself. A fiery blow pierced the girl's body, and she screamed in great pain. Karaha felt that her body was burning very much, and everything was burning. As a child, she read adventure stories many times, which she loved with all her heart. Dragon's breath is a huge danger, as well as the greatest opportunity. Her heart fluttered every time she dreamed. Karaha has always wanted to go on such adventures since she was a child. The monster continued to attack. Holand furiously started shooting at the monster. He used the majestic bow of the Lord of the Winds. Holand immediately stopped and called out to Karaha. He approached her to check on her condition. Holand asked her if she was alive. Karaha replied weakly that she was, trying to raise her hand. He smiled and was very happy about it. The man told the girl not to move in any case, because now he would call a healer from the cathedral here. He told her to hold on with all her might for now. Holand said that if it wasn't for her, he definitely wouldn't have been able to kill that monster. The man looked at her and was grateful for what Karaha had done for him. He said the girl did a great job. Karaha felt terrible. The girl tried to smile and chuckled at his words. Holand said they were taking care of the rest of the monsters for now, so she should rest. The girl thanked him. Holand noticed that Karaha had saved not only them, but also the whole city. He added that when the girl wakes up, she will be awarded a medal. Suddenly, a scream was heard. Before he could finish, Holand looked up and found that a large number of flying monsters appeared in the sky, which were moving directly towards the city. The man dropped his cigarette on the ground. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Others shouted that this simply could not be, and they barely coped with one monster, and now there are so many of them. Holand froze and couldn't move. He was terrified and fell silent. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Someone called out to him. One of the men shouted for everyone to be taken to the cathedral. He said he would buy them some time. Holand looked at him in disbelief. Another shouted that the whole kingdom was under threat of destruction. Holand was hailed and asked to leave here as soon as possible. Claha asked him to leave already. The man frowned and shouted loudly in anger. One of his comrades ordered everyone who has the strength to give their best. And the rest of us stand up for them. He said he needed to distract the other monsters, even if it was only for a few seconds. He shouted for everyone to shoot. Suddenly, Holand turned around and saw a flying monster start a fire in the sky. The man thought that the last insta was nothing compared to this one. He started running. Holand knew he wouldn't make it in time, as the fire was coming straight at him. The other archers froze in horror, watching what was happening. Holand shouted out of desperation and from what was happening now. Everyone was desperately fighting for their lives. Claha lay motionless and powerlessly watched what was happening. There were monsters around that got close too fast. Suddenly, a guy who was armed with a sword appeared in the sky. It turned out to be Ununice. He struck at the monsters. Claha could barely see the outline of the guy who was in front of her. She couldn't figure out who it was. Ununice smiled and said it looked like they had made it just in time. However, he added that the total solar eclipse will begin only at dawn. He held up his hand. Ununice offered to show what the Archmage of the Stars had gained by overcoming countless trials and tribulations. What the guy got was true strength. Ununice used his magic, and a starfall began, which hit the monsters and hit them. Meanwhile, Lilia decided to greet everyone. She waved her hand and saw a soldier and Arlene in front of her. The girl said that she had finally returned. Arlene exclaimed and was surprised that the saint had returned. Lilia apologized for being a little late. Arlene was about to ask where Lilia had been all this time. Arlene was outraged and told Lilia not to call her that in front of strangers anymore. Although it doesn't matter at all now, she decided to tell the girl about the current situation in the city. Arlene said there are a lot of casualties and destruction right now. 3 roads leading to the cathedral were blocked, but because of the appearance of such a large number of instas, everything has become worse. Lilia said she was leaving everything to her. She sighed and added that she could still help Arlene. She entered the building, and everyone started exclaiming when they saw her. The girl saw in front of her a woman who was lying exhausted, and a little girl who was crying bitterly, being near her. She was screaming that something had happened to her mom. Lilia told her not to worry about anything. Meanwhile, Arlene looked up and noticed those monster birds. Now they were startled and falling to the ground. Arlene noticed Lilia kneeling down and starting to use her magic. The girl said that the number of victims will now be reduced to 0. So there was a bright flash of light. Arlene covered her eyes with her hands. She turned around and noticed how the girl's mother came to her senses. Her daughter exclaimed joyfully and clung to her. Arlene noticed that the woman was immediately healed. She was very surprised by this. Arlene thought about how glad she was that Lilia was still alive. It was illuminated by a bright light. People were surprised at themselves and began to notice that their wounds were healing, and everyone was healing. Holand looked up at the sky in surprise. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Claha. The girl looked down at her hands. She was amazed that her wounds were disappearing and she could move again. The girl saw the silhouette of a guy in front of her. The young man turned around. Claha saw Gil in front of her, smiling at her. He apologized for getting lost. Gil thought about how hard it was to check every nook and cranny all this time without even being able to sit down, kill every monster in sight. It was really a very difficult and stressful 3 days. Gil took a deep breath and shouted, trying to call Claha. He asked where she was. The girl said she was sitting right here. The young man turned around and looked at her in surprise. He did not expect that the girl was right next to him. Gil looked ahead and noticed Holand, who was watching him intently. He frowned and remembered the plan for the future. Holand was completely at a loss. Gil squatted down and quietly asked Claha what was going on here right now. Ununice said she was the only one on his side. The girl said that when the animals began to attack, they evacuated all residents to the cathedral, as well as secured escape routes and helped those who could not leave in time. But then the apocryphal beasts appeared. Karaha noticed that if it wasn't for them, they wouldn't have been alive for a long time. Gil thought deeply. The young man asked how much she knew about the apocryphal beasts and whether they had already found their leader. The girl asked him again and replied that she had not seen anyone like him. Gil said that, in that case, he was clearly targeting the cathedral. The guy was thinking that if he waited a little longer, everything would clear up, of course. Gil asked Karahi if she could take him there. The girl replied that, of course. Holand was behind the guy. He addressed him as a hero and asked what they should do next. Gil turned around and asked what it was. He looked at Holand in disbelief. The man asked him if they needed help. The young man thought about his words. Karaha turned to him and told him that none of them would escape anymore. He looked at her and replied that he understood everything. Gil replied that he didn't need their help. He told them to focus better on saving people. Gil also added that he was counting on them. The man replied that they would take everything into account. Karaha pointed to one of the houses and said that a large building was on the other side. Gil thought about it. The girl looked at him in surprise. The guy was trying to see what Karaha was showing him. The girl noticed that Gil couldn't see anything. She told him to wait just a second. The girl put the glasses in his hands. Karaha said that she was saving them for him so that she could give them to him personally. She added that perhaps the glasses were damaged in the last battle. The girl opened the box. Gil picked up the glasses. The girl was watching him closely. The guy lifted his glasses up and was very happy, not hiding his smile. Karaha asked him if the glasses were still completely intact. Gil immediately exclaimed joyfully. He immediately put on his glasses. The guy said with unprecedented joy that now he sees everything. Now he sees the city, the stars in the sky. He pointed at everything with his finger and said exactly what he saw. That building, the stone, and even the dog. Gil didn't miss anything in front of him. The guy shouted that now he can see absolutely everything with glasses. Jill asked the girl if it wasn't cool. Karaha was very surprised and hesitantly agreed with him. The girl continued to look at him. Gil smiled and took off his cape. He put it on Karaha. Gil added that now with glasses he can notice various little things. The guy noticed that Karaha must be frozen. The girl smiled and thanked him. Gil winked at her and immediately ran forward, saying that now they urgently need to go to the cathedral. Karaha shouted at him not to run in that direction, as it was the wrong way. She thought that even with the glasses, Gil still had the wrong sense of direction. Meanwhile, Lilia came down and was surprised to see that Jill had come in front of her. She said Gil's face had changed. The guy replied that she might not know, but it's usually called wearing glasses. The girl grinned and said that he was very lucky as he looks good with glasses. Gil smiled broadly and agreed with her. Lilia also added that she has good news. Gil looked at her questioningly. The girl said that she and Ununice put so much energy into printing and into those massive spells that they spent almost everything. That is, we can say that they no longer have mana left. Gil was taken aback and asked where this could be called good news. He heard footsteps behind him and immediately turned around. Karaha also looked ahead. Lilia was smiling sweetly. She said that Jill would fight him one-on-one. Karaha asked uncertainly if this was the one Jill had mentioned earlier. A man was walking towards them. And whether this is the leader, in fact, the girl asked Lilia. The saint replied that everything was as she thought. Namely, this is an apocryphal magical equipment. Karaha asked if Lilia was talking about the eraser. Karaha thought about the apocryphal magical equipment. After all, there are only 13 different items that the fallen king himself used. Lilia said that she was sure that as soon as he touched this sword, his heart and mind were mired in the all-consuming hatred of the fallen king. And all this in order to revive the fallen king. Gil turned to Godak and asked him to listen to everything the guy had to say. Gil added that the abyss has already been sealed again thanks to the saint and the archmage, and even if he destroys the cathedral, the fallen king will not rise from it. He kept coming straight at them. The man told Jill to run away, as he would never defeat the eraser. Karaha and Lilia were watching him. Gil thought it was amazing that he was still conscious. He didn't expect anything less from an S-rank adventurer. He continued and said that a person should not even hope to be able to defeat this magic sword. Gil immediately drew his sword, picking it up. The young man asked Godak if that was why he wanted Jill to come. The guy said that he knew for years that he couldn't win alone. Gil decided that the man also knew that the fallen king would be reborn again if he did nothing about it. Therefore, the man gathered all his last strength that he had left and sent Gil, so that the guy can seal the maze. He replied that it would be impossible even for Gil and told him to run away better. Gil seriously stated that he still lacked experience, but with this sword he would definitely prove that he had made the right choice. Swordsman Gil has finally returned. The guy smiled broadly and was ready for the upcoming fight. Gil saw how he immediately turned into a monster. He was thinking that 50% of the time, the outcome of a fight is determined by the first blow. The guy saw Godak's hand grow to a large size. Gil decided to attack first and started running. He decided to hit him, but the guy immediately realized that his blow was immediately blocked. Godak's huge hand grabbed Jin's torso. The guy used his sword to free himself. He pushed him away, and Gil flew to the side. He noticed how she was trying to attack him again, so the guy jumped so he couldn't catch him. Gil stabbed him with a sword. He began to watch him closely. The guy noticed that Godak had an incredible regeneration rate. Therefore, his body recovers immediately. Gil saw her running towards him again. The guy was thinking that there were only two ways to deal with him. Namely, the first method was to attack him until he ran out of mana. Gil stabbed him in the torso with his sword, slicing through him. He turned back, watching Godak. The guy decided that it could hardly work with him at all. He began to destroy everything around him. Gil thought that there was still a second way in this case. The young man got ready and jumped on Godak. The second method was to kill him with a single blow. He used the eighth sword, as well as the ability to split lightning, to deal Godak a decisive blow. With his sword, Gil cut Godak's head. He noticed that steam was starting to come off his body. Gil was watching Godak closely. He heard a strange gurgling sound. Suddenly, a noise was heard, and a magical release occurred. There was an explosion, and devastation came. Gil barely managed to stay on his feet. The only reason the guy would be able to survive then was because he had been holding back this power for years. The young man saw a huge depression in front of him, which appeared immediately after the explosion. Gil came to the conclusion that it all happened because he hit Godak with his magic sword. The young man noticed how regeneration began in place of the head. That's how it all started. Namely, the sword that invaded the soul of the Godak warrior and eliminated an obstacle in its path. Gil saw teeth and jaw sprouting from under Godak's body. At least that's how it was. The monster growled again. He began to strike at Gil, until the swordsman reappeared. The guy's eyes widened and he struggled to hold back Godak's punches. Gil thought about how the sword was feeling a lot of rage now. Madness, namely a feeling that is unlike anything he has experienced before. The guy was looking directly at Godak. As a result of regeneration, the monster had a semblance of a head, a distorted face with eyes and teeth. For the first time since the magic sword prospector was born, he felt fear because of one swordsman. Gil decided that he would definitely break this sword next time. He pointed his weapon directly at Godak. It was an extremely strange feeling. Unlike gaining knowledge and the effect of awakening, Gil's soul moves much faster than his body in awareness. This is the understanding of how to really wield a sword. He immediately directed his power at Gil, but the guy managed to dodge right away. The young man saw all his movements. Meanwhile, he grabbed him. Gil immediately cut off his fingers with which he was holding him. His stump was sticking out and was right in front of Gil. He was betting that he would never have been able to reach such a level alone. The guy thought it would be impossible if there wasn't even one of them. Gil thought about Godak when he was conscious, the saint, and the eternally smiling Ununice. Even one of them. The young man came to the conclusion that if he had given up for any reason, he definitely would never have been able to go beyond his limits. Gil smiled and thought about Claha and mentally thanked everyone for everything. The guy was ready to attack again, while the monster kept coming straight at him. He thanked everyone for helping him get this far. Gil smiled and dissected the monster's torso. He used an unusual and secret sword technique to stab him. After Gil used this technique, Godak's exhausted body appeared from under the monster's shell, which immediately fell to the ground. The young man gathered up his sword. He turned around and heard a sound coming from somewhere. After a while, the guy came to where the others were waiting for him. Gil noticed people who greeted him joyfully and exclaimed. He chuckled and asked if they were all that worried about him. Claha smiled broadly. Lilia was also very happy, and Ununice was sitting, barking at everything, at the top of one of the houses. Gil smiled. He thought that he still couldn't accept it all. The guy raised his hand joyfully, feeling clearly relieved after everything that had happened to him. After a while, Gil found himself in his bed. He was sleeping soundly and could hear Lilia calling him insistently. The young man saw the girl trying to wake him up. She was a ladle in the pan, so that the sound could definitely wake Gil up. The young man did not get enough sleep and barely opened his eyes. The girl wished him a good morning. Gil continued to stare at her in silence. He tried to open his eyes and wished her a good morning as well. A few days later, Gil was getting ready, buttoning up his shirt. His hair was shorter than before. Lilia asked him if the guy was leaving today. The girl added that she thought it would be better to wake the guy up early in this case. She asked if Gil was offended. The guy replied that he did not, and also added that he was even grateful to Lilia for waking him up early. The girl grinned and smiled broadly, holding the ladle behind her back. She left the room. Lilia added that she would not interfere with him. She told him to change his clothes and wash up, and noticed that, in fact, she didn't care if the guy did it or not. The girl just asked him to do everything as quickly as possible. Lilia immediately left his room. Gil continued to smile. He closed his eyes and imagined a girl in an apron. He blushed and decided that this was definitely the best thing you could see in front of you early in the morning. The guy thought that he had tried his best to suppress this feeling then because of the oppressive atmosphere, but he more or less understood everything, considering the fact that Ununice was talking to her. Gil decided that he would beat the crap out of any idiot who took it into his head to call Lilia an 80-year-old grandmother. The guy's thoughts were interrupted. Ununice appeared in front of him. The guy was smiling broadly and greeted him. Ununice added that it had been a long time since they had seen him since the morning. Gil was smiling at him sheepishly. He noticed that Ununice was in a contentedly good mood, despite the fact that it was quite early. Ununice chuckled, and he said that, in fact, he was just going to sleep. Ununice added that he felt like a squeezed lemon, completely exhausted. He asked Gil if he would have breakfast. The guy answered positively. They both went into the same dining room, where they saw Lilia at the far end, who was happily waving her hands at them. She looked quite cheerful. The guys were smiling, and Gil thought that Lilia had already started eating without them. Finally, everyone sat down at the table and began to eat. Breakfast was served on one of the plates. Lilia, on the other hand, ate bread with obvious appetite. The girl said that they probably won't get together like this for a while. Ununice asked Gil if he was going to leave soon. The guy answered positively. He added that he was going to leave before noon. Lilia continued to eat and asked Gil if he needed a cart. She noticed that Atian had asked her about it. Gil said no, because he's fine as it is. The girl replied that now everything became clear to her. Everyone was sitting, stuffing their mouths with food. Everyone enjoyed the meal. Ununice asked if they would say goodbye, in that case, immediately after breakfast. Gil replied positively, and he added that he also needed to go to the hospital for a short time. He asked if they had definitely regained consciousness. Lilia happily replied that she did. Gil took a cup of tea and smiled. He was glad that he would finally fulfill the promise he had been putting off for so long. Lilia also smiled and took a cup of tea in her hands. She replied that everything was clear to her now. Gil was about to say something about the promise, but the girl interrupted him. Lilia told the guy not to forget to write. Ununice and Gil fell silent. After a couple of seconds, they remembered about it. The girl asked them if they had forgotten about it. Lilia added that it's not cool at all. The girl asked Gil to be sure to write to her when he decides to stay somewhere. The guy smiled and replied that of course he would do it, no problem. Lilia asked them if they remembered that her handwriting was very cute and beautiful. Ununice exclaimed and said that he would definitely make a fantastic secret code. Gil listened to them in silence and watched them. He turned to them and warned them that, most likely, his letters would not be particularly interesting. Lilia said she was looking forward to them. Ununice told the guy to try to come up with something. Gil replied that he would try to do it. He smiled and lowered his head. Lilia and Ununice were also very happy and did not hide their smiles. Gil got up from the table. Lilia told him to make sure the guy took care of himself. Ununice agreed with her. Lilia called out to him and held up her finger. Gil turned and looked at her in surprise. She smiled broadly and asked what about the goodbye kiss. Gil couldn't believe what he had just heard from the girl. He didn't understand what was happening now. Ununice and Lilia pulled on their hands mittens in the form of toy animals. The girl jokingly addressed Gil as sweet and told him to hold a kiss. Ununice and Gil tried to make fun of Gil and kissed him with their cute mittens. The young man clearly did not expect that this would happen to him. He was very surprised and frowned. Gil obviously didn't like it too much. Meanwhile, the guy took the mittens from them and decided to do to them the same thing they did to him. The young man used toys and applied them to the faces of Ununice and Lilia, jokingly making funny noises along the way. This could not help but make both Ununice and the Lilia laugh. While Jill was doing this, he reflected that it was much more fun than he could have imagined. With the help of one of the toys, he pulled Unice's cheek. After such a game, all three joined hands. Lilia turned to Ununice and Gil. They looked at her questioningly. The girl smiled and said that one day the three of them would meet again. After a while, when Gil had already left the gate, he turned around and smiled, thinking that this must have been fate. After that, the young man decided to hit the road. Gil visited one of the hospitals. He asked the nurse exactly where he needed to go. She replied that the guy needed to go up to the 4th floor. Gil found the right room and decided to knock on the door before entering. He heard someone outside the door telling him to come in. Gil came into the room and said right away that there was no need to apologize to him at all. The guy saw a bandaged Godak in front of him, near which there were members of the guild. The man immediately got up from the bed and called out to the young man. The guy asked Godak not to overexert himself like that. Gil added that he had heard that his muscles and bones had not yet recovered after being affected by the magic sword, so in this case, Gil suggested that he just lie down. He said he was very sorry. The man lowered his head and added that he wanted to make it before Gil arrived. But since the guy has arrived here, he will probably leave soon. Gil said he decided to visit them one last time. The young man also gave the woman flowers, to which she replied that it was very nice of him. He looked at him again and immediately lowered his head as he felt guilty in front of him. He said he knew that Jill had asked him not to apologize, but even so, the man wanted to tell him something. He added that he could not thank Jill in full and also apologize properly. Jill was staring at him intently. He said that he personally lured him into a trap, stabbed him in the back, and then left him to die alone in the maze. Gil thought about the fact that he was at it again. He added that the saint and the archmage were able to seal it again. He noticed that Gil was even able to destroy the apocryphal equipment. Thus, the guy saved not only this city, but also the whole world. Gil smiled and was happy to think that, indeed, they had come quite a long way. He thought it was very cool. He said there was no conceivable way for someone like him. So that someday, I can properly thank Gil or apologize. He shouted that even so, no matter what the guy told him, he would do everything possible, even if it cost his life. Gil was extremely unhappy that he had only heard that from Godak. He told him to stop immediately and never say such things. He didn't understand why Jill was trying to contradict him. The guy approached him and said that he needed to clarify something with him. Gil added that he really didn't care. He said this to the fact that at the moment when he almost killed the guy, he had the idea to beat the shit out of him. He looked at Gil with obvious sadness. He didn't understand what the guy was trying to convey to him. The young man said that Godak had no choice. The man looked at him carefully. He said that if he had taken one wrong step, then Jill could have died for sure. The guy took a deep breath. He said that after the members of the Godak group visited him many times, and most of them are now nearby, they apologized to Gil over and over again. Namely, for the things he had done to Gil, for their own cowardice, and for crimes so grave that they could never again be called adventurers in such a case. Gil added that despite all these circumstances, he doesn't care about anything like that. I was amazed by what I had just heard from him. The young man said that the years did not force him to go into the maze with him, nor did they lure him into a trap. The guy noticed that he trusted him. The man looked up at him. Gil added that each person did what they were capable of to the best of their abilities. Such twists and turns of fate, from strengths and weaknesses, they brought them to where they are right now, and everyone has to decide for themselves how they will treat it. Gil smiled broadly and said that, despite this, he was glad that they had to go through this tortuous and difficult path. He was completely amazed and didn't say anything. Tears began to roll down his veins. He immediately covered his face with his hand. Gil added that he was most proud of the fact that despite his cursed body, he chose him as the sword that was supposed to pave the path. On a narrow path, where the man decided to enter. Drops of Godak's tears soaked the sheets on his bed. He continued to cry, covering his face with his hands. Gil said that it was the years that brought him here and gave him a chance to save the whole world. He bowed and thanked the man for the opportunity. Soon, Gil left the hospital where he had been staying for years. He took one last look at her and, smiling, walked on. Gil saw a large number of wagons in front of him. He also noticed Arnelate, who was busy working and giving instructions to the workers. The girl turned around and noticed the guy. She was very surprised. Meanwhile, one of the workers recognized Gil. The guy immediately tensed up. Everyone also turned their attention to him and recognized in Gil the man who saved their city. People shouted and called Gil a hero, a savior. Some even called him master. The guy asked them not to call him mister. Or the people replied that he was very sorry. It's just that Gil cared so much about their saint. Therefore, no one could have imagined that the young man could be treated in any other way, and not with due respect. The guy replied that he now understood what was the matter. Someone laughed and apologized, calling Gil a gentleman again. Meanwhile, the girl with glasses came up to him, and she began to tell me what she knew about Gil's death. After all, there were legends about his power, but she could not imagine that Gil would return. She added that they were very grateful to him, and if he needed anything, then Gil could safely contact them. The guy thought that this girl's name was Arnelate, and she served Lilia. Gil drank the water. He decided that Arnelate was probably a good person. The girl smiled and asked the guy how she could help him. She added that Lilia told her that the guy was about to leave. Gil replied positively. He asked Arnelate where Claha was. The girl immediately got up and shouted to everyone that Mr. Gil wanted to talk to her. She asked if anyone knew where the girl was now. Everyone immediately took note and exclaimed joyfully that the hero himself, the savior, and Mr. Gil had arrived to them. One of the girls said that if they were looking for Claha, she should be back soon. Arnelate smiled and thanked her for the information provided. She was very pleased and beaming with joy. Arnelate informed Gil that everything was now settled. He just needs to wait a bit. Arnelate said that now she needs to get back to her job. Gil was sweating. He thought about how ashamed he was and what an awkward and strange situation he had ended up in. Meanwhile, he was hailed as a great hero. The guy turned around and saw Holand in front of him. He noticed his clothes and wanted to say something about them. But Holand interrupted him and added that he was leaving today. Gil replied that he understood everything. He asked the man if he had visited Godak. Holand replied positively and added that he had visited him not so long ago. The guy replied that everything was clear to him. Holand decided to go ahead and suddenly stopped. He turned and looked at Gil. Holand turned to the great hero and said that he would never be able to fully thank him for his help. Gil assured him that he had heard such words 1,000 times before. He asked the man how their research was progressing. Holand was surprised and replied that it was thanks to Gil that everything was going just fine. After all, now that the fallen king has been sealed again, the mana that leaked through the seal has begun to disappear, and exploring the maze has become much easier. Nevertheless, its structure is still extremely complex, so they can't get to the deeper floors yet. As they find a suitable path, they set up camps after a certain distance to gain a foothold. Gil drank the water and answered. Now he understood everything. The guy noticed that, as he said earlier, and you need to be as careful as possible when passing through that door. Maybe there's still a little critter out there somewhere. And even so, they should not let their guard down. Holand understood everything. He said that he would join the first major hike to the ground floors, so the man would definitely keep an eye on the surroundings. Gil replied that he hoped so. He added that, as a last resort, it is better to always have a lot of people on hand who are able to defeat apocryphal beasts. Holand agreed with him, so he took a chair and put it next to him to sit down. Holand and Gil were sitting next to each other under the awning. Holand looked at Gil and asked him if that was why he had come here after all. The guy said it was true. Holand replied that he understood everything. So Gil saw in front of him people who were walking with backpacks straight and up. The girl noticed him too and called out to him. The girl immediately ran to him. They greeted each other. Gil immediately hesitated. Holand asked him why he was so nervous. The guy replied that it was his first time. Holand scoffed at him and asked him if he was not a great hero. Claha looked at them with extreme surprise. She didn't understand what he was talking about. Holand kicked him and told him to get going. Gil cried out in pain. He blushed and said that he had made a promise after all. The girl began to stare at him intently. Gil began to get very nervous. He spoke uncertainly about the fact that, most likely, Claha no longer remembers all the details. The girl interrupted him. She was surprised that Gil still hadn't forgotten. Claha put the bag down on the ground. The guy got nervous. The girl painfully said that she did not deserve all this since she had done nothing. Karaha added that if Holand, the other members of the group, Arnolate, and everyone else had not helped her, then the girl would definitely not have been able to cope with everything alone. Karaha lowered his head. She felt that none of this was her doing. Gil smiled. He said that the same could be said about him. The guy asked if Karaha understood him. Gil added that someone should have given him a good kick in the ass, and, in the end, he only did what was within his capabilities. Karaha began to cry bitterly. Gil continued and said that from now on he was going to constantly go beyond his limits. During the upcoming search and destruction of the apocryphal beasts that slipped through the seal, as well as through the dark times that may come as a result, he will rely on others. Namely, those who stand shoulder to shoulder with Gil. The guy said that he thinks that there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking for help. To someone brave who always moves forward no matter what. He asked Karahi if she would help him in this case. The guy held out his hand to her and smiled. Gil said that, after all, he has a terrible sense of direction, and if he is alone, he will most likely not reach the routes he needs. Karaka continued to cry bitterly. She thought that this was exactly what she had dreamed of all her life. Gil added that in return for wielding a sword, he would like the girl to help him on this journey. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry for her. Karaha has always dreamed of becoming a real adventurer. The girl said she wasn't sure she really deserved it. There were memories in her head of how, as a child, she indulged in dreams about the life of a real heroine. But even so, the girl decided that she would try anyway. She smiled and replied to the guy that she would be happy to go on a trip with him. They shook hands. The girl decided that now she would not back down for anything. About 3 years ago, Gil found a girl he asked to take him in for a while. He was asked if he was lost, and whether I really haven't eaten anything but dirt for the last 3 days, and whether dirt is edible at all. He was allowed to live in this house for a while. The girl said that, after all, if Gil was wandering around the city in this form, and even with a sword, it would definitely cause a lot of problems. The guy started crying bitterly. The hostess said that she would shelter him for a short time, but on condition that he did not create any problems. Gil thought about what a generous girl she was. The guy also asked her for food. She told him to go inside. The guy smiled and introduced himself as Gil. He also said that he is also called the Dragon Slayer. Gil said that if she needed any help, she could just tell him. At this time, the girl remained silent and pulled out her sword. Some may say that it was quite a long time ago, while others, on the contrary, will think that it happened quite recently. Currently, Gil has started writing letters to Ununice and Lilia. He asked how they were doing. The guy wrote about what is now in the East. He came here to seek help from a well-known optician, but he went bankrupt, and it really knocked the wind out of his sails. The guy also met a lot of friends here, so he's thinking about staying here. Gil wrote that he was glad that everything was finally over after the chaos caused by the maze. He asked Lilia if she had already returned to the main cathedral. He also asked Ununice if he was going to return to the Great Library. He asked them to let him know about it as soon as they received the letter. The guy also decided to ask them if they had ever had students. To be honest, this was Gil's first time doing this, and some things are very confusing. He will be glad to hear their advice. Gil decided to write to Lilia personally. The way he writes and the way he speaks are completely different from each other. The girl was lying on her bed and smiling broadly as she read his letter. In a letter to Ununice, Gil wrote that his secret code was too complicated. The guy said that he still hadn't figured it out, but it had already been a whole week. Ununice was happy when word came to him from Gil. Gil decided to read the letter from Lilia, where she also addressed Ununice. She wrote that she hoped that both of them would never change. There was also an appeal to Gil personally. Lilia asked him to return the mysterious old woman. The letter was signed with love, Lilia. The young man also read a letter from Ununice. He addressed the two of them and wrote that he didn't even have friends, let alone students. Personally, Gila Ununice asked him to think about this and about him as much as possible. 6 hours in a row. Ununice signed, "Sincerely yours, Archmage." Gil smiled sincerely and closed the letters he had just read. He closed his eyes and thought about what he would write to them, namely that he had asked Ununice and Lilia about it in vain. Meanwhile, Karaha came up to the guy, who called out to him. The young man looked at her questioningly. The girl assumed that there seemed to be monsters ahead. Therefore, they will not be able to get any further. Gil asked her if they could walk in that case. The girl replied that, most likely, they will be able to do it. Karaha said that according to the map, There is a road there. Gil smiled sweetly and thought that it had been 2 whole weeks since they had left the city. And, to be honest, the adventure was pretty calm. Gil suggested walking the rest of the way. Karaha agreed with him. Some may wonder in which place this adventure can be called calm, but considering that the optician the guy was going to went broke, the van that was supposed to go on stopped. In this case, they may say that this does not look like a quiet adventure at all, but the fact is that Jill usually loses her way or paves a new path. But what happened when the guy was traveling, of course, was very strange. Gil decided that nothing like this had ever happened after all. The guy came to the conclusion that when he did not even have time to come to his senses, he immediately found himself in a completely unfamiliar place. And in order to understand where he was, Gil always had to climb to the highest places so that he could have a normal view of everything around him. Or, in such cases, the guy went with the flow of the river just to get to the ocean. Gil recalled how, in some incomprehensible way, he ended up buried in the ground. He came to the conclusion that now he would no longer have to go through all this. No way. Even in his wildest dreams, Gil could not have imagined that he could travel at the same time and not even worry about anything. He kept his eyes closed and began to think about many things. Meanwhile, Karaha called out to him. The girl came closer and took hold of part of his jacket. The guy immediately turned around. The girl decided to stop him. She said they didn't have to go in the direction Jill wanted them to go. The guy looked at her in surprise. He grinned and said he was just looking around. Gil noticed that the flowers hadn't bloomed yet this year. The girl agreed with him. Karaha said that when he mentioned it, it seemed to her that the trees should have been covered with foliage by now. Gil asked the girl if she knew much about plants. The girl said she definitely wouldn't have answered that way. Karaha added that she just read about it in the directory. The guy looked at her and said he understood everything. Gil felt like they were like a companion and a student. He thought about how Karaha had never let him down before. The girl asked Gil what he had taught her 3 days ago. The guy asked what exactly. She struck a pose and asked if she needed to hold the hilt of her sword in that position. Gil replied that everything, of course, depends primarily on the situation. The guy said that if the girl took it in such a grip, the sword would be less shaky, and the girl would be able to put a lot more strength into the blow. However, in addition to gaining knowledge, Gil also had the experience of fighting with Insta. But the most amazing thing was Gil's understanding of the sword. His master would definitely say that Jill is the real problem. He recalled how the stern man asked him if he was thinking about some nonsense when he brandished a sword. In response to his lengthy reasoning, Gil thought about the fact that he now wields a sword himself. Meanwhile, Karaha wrote down all the important information she had heard from Gil. Gil continued to smile broadly. The guy decided that the training was going well. Gil thought that was probably why he was so worried. Karaha noticed that Gil's shoe strap was untied. The girl knelt down and decided to help him with this. The guy replied that everything was fine and he could do it himself. The girl said that everything was fine and she was almost done with his shoes. Gil was embarrassed and blushed. He thanked the girl for her help. Karaha replied that there was no problem. The guy wondered if Karaha thought it was honest. Gil thought about the fact that the girl takes care of the preparation for the road, but also takes care of every little thing. In recent days, Karaha has been solving even the most trivial issues, which also relate to his daily life. And if this continues for another couple of months, then Jill is afraid that his body will no longer be able to survive without her. He frowned and thought about it with horror. But more importantly, Karaha helped Gil during this journey, in exchange for the guy teaching her swordsmanship techniques. The girl asked the guy if he was sweating and if he was hot. The guy thought they should be on the same level. Gil, of course, understood that because of the situation with the maze, he had a feeling that Karaha considered herself indebted to him. However, in the end, this greatly tipped the scales, and this is not good. Gil was thinking about what could be done for the girl in this case. He was deep in thought, and suddenly an interesting thought came to him, like a bolt from the blue. He called out to the girl. Karaha turned around and looked at him. Gil started running towards her and shouted that he had found a mushroom. The guy wondered if he would even be found in the directory. He noticed that, unfortunately, it was a poisonous mushroom. In the worst-case scenario, one bite will result in instant death, and, apparently, mountain squirrels have developed immunity to poison and constantly feed on these mushrooms. Therefore, people who are lost in the mountains mistakenly believe that mushrooms are edible. Gil replied that he understood everything. The girl apologized for interrupting him. The guy replied that everything was fine. Karaha asked him if there was anything he wanted to ask. Gil said that the mushroom causes mouth ulcers and fever, but it is still very tasty. They both stopped abruptly. The girl was amazed by what she had just heard from him. Gil decided that it seemed time to stop sharing his gastronomic tricks.